in the defence of the realm. I've always believed that is the first duty of government. But could I say to the Minister on the floor of the House, you can't have it both ways. You can't, on the one hand, plead for unity between the government and the opposition, and then when it suits you, imply that opposition spokesmen are somehow Russian or Chinese or Iranian fellow travellers because they had the temerity not to agree with you on your bonkers Chagos deal. So my honest advice to the Minister is, make your mind up and be consistent, and then you will receive the respect that you asked for in return. Now, turning to the order directly, the Armed Forces are normally subject to a the Armed Forces Acts, are normally subject to a quinquennial review. We had Armed Forces Acts in 2011, 16 and 21, and we can now expect a further Armed Forces Act before the instrument expires in December 2026. Given the vagaries of parliamentary life, Madam Deputy Speaker, few things are certain. But assuming for a moment that it will be the Armed Forces Minister and myself who take this legislation through on behalf of our respective parties, this seems a good opportunity, firstly, to ask the Minister what the latest timings are on that prospective legislation and when we can expect to see a bill. Secondly, pending that, perhaps the Minister could give the House some idea of what the key themes of that bill are likely to be and in which areas, if any, the Act is likely to differ materially from the existing Armed Forces Act 2021. In fairness, he dropped a hint a few minutes ago that there will be service justice provisions. Perhaps, if he has an opportunity, he could just expand on that slightly. And I ask the question, Madam Deputy Speaker, because there'll be large numbers of interested parties, the armed forces themselves, obviously, the Armed Forces Families Federations, through to military charities and others, who, based on previous experience, would take a close and important interest in the bill. And therefore, to be able to give them as good a heads up as possible would clearly be desirable. So perhaps the Minister could assist the House this afternoon in that regard. As the explanatory notes that the Minister referred to point out, were this order not to be passed, then, and I quote them, the key effect of expiry of the 2006 Act would be to end the provisions which are necessary to maintain the armed forces as disciplined bodies. Crucially, the 2006 Act confers powers and sets out procedures to enforce the duty of members of the armed forces to obey lawful commands. Without the 2006 Act, those powers and procedures would no longer have effect. Commanding officers and the court-martial would have no powers of punishment in respect of a failure to obey a lawful command or any other form of disciplinary or criminal misconduct. Members of the armed forces would still owe allegiance to His Majesty, but the power of enforcement would be removed. Clearly, that would be a very undesirable situation. For the avoidance of doubt, we will most certainly not be voting against this order in a few minutes' time. Nonetheless, there's an important point here about members of the armed forces being required to obey lawful commands. And this brings me on to the third question and what I wish to ask the Minister this afternoon. As recently as Defence Questions on Monday, we were debating in this chamber the fate of the 300,000 or so British Army veterans who served in Northern Ireland on Operation Banner. They were lawfully commanded to help uphold the rule of law in support of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, GC, now the PSNI, and to protect all people in Northern Ireland from whatever tradition they might come from heinous acts of terrorism, whether by bomb or by bullet. As the Minister will be well aware, the Government has tabled a so-called remedial order which would cut out elements of the 2023 Northern Ireland Legacy Act, thus potentially opening up some of those veterans to an endless cycle of investigation and reinvestigation. As currently drafted, the remedial order also makes it easier for the likes of Jerry Adams and his compadres to potentially sue the British taxpayer for hundreds of millions of pounds. Now, according to a press report in the Daily Telegraph yesterday, and an associated PQ from the Northern Ireland Secretary, the Government has now decided to drop the part of the remedial order which would assist Mr Adams and his associates from suing the British taxpayer. Now, if that report is true, this is something on which these benches would warmly welcome. However, it still doesn't solve the problem of the potential persecution of our brave veterans who served in Northern Ireland, often being persecuted at the behest of Sinn Féin. So if it... Yes, I will indeed.
Just on that point, whenever he and other members of the Conservative Shadow Defence team bring up the question of reopening this lawfare against our veterans. Government ministers always say, we will be sure to give them maximum support. To me, that implies not protecting them from the lawfare, but supporting them as they go through the process. Right. But the process is the punishment. Everybody knows that people who were involved in fatal accidents would only serve a limited prison term if, heaven forbid, convicted. But the probability is they won't be convicted, but the punishment lies in what they have to go through before they are acquitted.
My right honourable friend chaired the select committee on which I served some years ago when they produced a really very good report on this whole issue, so he is an expert on this. All I will say is that when it comes to legacy issues, Labour often provides legal support, but not necessarily always to veterans. So if the Minister wishes to maintain morale in the armed forces, both past and present, something for which this order is clearly necessary, perhaps he would take this opportunity now to clarify precisely the government's position and whether or not they still intend to table a remedial order, or whether they intend now to move straight to what the Labour manifesto describes as new legislation in the whole field of legacy matters. Which is it? Yes.
To seek a clarification, I suppose, support from the shadow bench in regard to that. They also recognise that there may be a bit of a disconcern in the government between the Ministry of Defence front bench but also the Northern Ireland office front bench as to how this proceeds.
I certainly hope there is. I very much hope that MOD ministers in private, even if they can't say so in public, are fighting tenaciously to have this mad order scrapped and to defend the Northern Ireland veterans in a way that the Northern Ireland veterans defended all of us. The Minister understands exactly what I mean by that, and I think he and some of his ministerial colleagues may have been working on this, and if they have, then in good faith we wish them Godspeed. One more question on this and then I'll move on. If it is the government's intention to still go ahead with the remedial order, and again the House would really welcome clarity on this, despite the fact that that would have disastrous consequences for both recruitment and retention, which the Minister mentioned a few minutes ago, could the Minister confirm exactly what the government's policy is now is, and is it to go A, down the remedial order route, or B, new primary legislation, and if it's B, what are the timings for that new bill? Fourthly and finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister for the Armed Forces has signed a formal statement to the effect that, in his view, the provisions of the Armed Forces Act 2006 Continuation Order 2025 are compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. However, there's now a question as to whether, were British troops to be deployed to Ukraine as part of some coalition of the willing, perhaps following a potential ceasefire in Ukraine, what would happen to those British troops if they were to subsequently be involved in combat with Russian forces or with Russian acolytes? What guarantee could the Ministry give that if soldiers were to fire their weapons in anger, they would not subsequently be subject to lawfare using the Human Rights Act, even decades after the event, as is now the case in Northern Ireland? This is not an idle point, Madam Deputy Speaker. I understand this whole issue of lawfare and its effect on both recruitment and retention in the British Army has been raised at the most senior levels within the Army, including in recent meetings with the Chief of the General Staff himself. So this is therefore very much a live issue which deserves to be raised in Parliament, not least on behalf of the soldiers who might have to do it for real. So given all of this, would it not be helpful, as suggested a number of times by my right honourable friend, the Shadow Defence Secretary, for the Minister to issue a formal declaration that we would derogate from the European Convention on Human Rights for any British military operations in any way related to Ukraine, such that soldiers who served in that context would be excluded from any potential lawfare prosecutions, even decades later? The Minister will know for himself this is now materially affecting morale in the armed forces, especially among the Special Forces community. And so any reassurance he can give regarding a derogation would no doubt be gratefully received. So to summarise, Madam Deputy Speaker, we obviously support this order to continue the Armed Forces Act 2006 in operation until December 2026. It will be helpful to have some idea on timings and even the content for the prospective new Armed Forces Act 2026, as it's likely to be, in order to allow interested parties to plan. Perhaps in order to maintain both morale and discipline in our armed forces, the Minister could also confirm whether or not the Government would countenance derogating from the ECHR during future military operations, potentially including those in defence of Ukraine. Moreover, perhaps the Minister could update the House on where we are with regard to the Government's proposed new legislation on legacy matters, the fate of the proposed remedial order under the Human Rights Act 1998, and specifically whether the Government is now contemplating removing clauses from that remedial order, or abandoning the remedial order altogether, or whether they now intend to abandon the remedial order and instead rely on new primary legislation to achieve this aim. With those four questions, I conclude but for one other thing. The Father of the House gave us all very wise advice. We should increase defence spending. We can argue over how much and how quickly, but we certainly should in this increasingly dangerous world. And on these benches, we want to walk constructively with the Government and the Ministry of Defence for the defence of the realm. But do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yeah, very good.
Order, order. I will now announce the result of today's deferred divisions. On the Draft Enterprise Act 2002, mergers involving newspaper enterprises and foreign powers regulations 2025, the ayes were 338, the noes were 79, so the ayes have it. On the Draft Criminal Justice Act 2003, suitability for fixed-term recall, Order 2025, the ayes were 333, the noes were 168, so the ayes have it. I now call Chris Vince.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement today, and I actually really appreciate him bringing this debate to the floor of the House, and I think it shows the importance but also the importance this government puts on our armed forces, and in particular our armed forces personnel. I also welcome the pay rise this government is giving our service personnel, and the commitment that he has personally made to tackle recruitment and retention issues, as well, of course, as the £5 billion increase in spending. As I was unable to make my intervention, I would say I am disappointed this has turned into a party political debate, but I assure everyone in the House that I don't intend to say any more on that matter. I know this Act reflects a I recognise that this Act reflects a constitutional requirement, but I think it also gives us an annual opportunity to say thank you to our brave servicemen and women. As I've mentioned previously in this House, I am the son, and like most people of my age, the grandson of veterans. So I also would like to recognise the sacrifice that our armed forces families also make for this country. Of course, if this Act is not renewed, commanding officers and court martials will no longer have the power to punish or discipline service people. So it is obviously really important that we pass this Act today. But we should also recognise, for the vast majority of our servicemen and women, this part of the Act is actually irrelevant. However, we must support our servicemen and women as they support us, which is why I welcome him and the veterans' work on Op Valour. As Lord Coker said in The Other Place, we inhabit a world which is more dangerous than at any time since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, and I think that is something that everybody in this House can reflect on. Like many members across this House, I attend the turning of the page ceremony organised by the Speaker's Office and the Office of the Master of Arms every week, when I hear the names of members of this House and children of members of this House who lost their lives in the Second World War. And I have to say, I find it incredibly moving. This morning was particularly moving when one name was read out of a son of a member of the House who passed away at the age of 8 years old. Of course, our service personnel, our country cannot work in isolation, and we know it's incredibly important to recognise the work that our armed forces do, working in collaboration with our NATO allies. But finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity, first of all, to thank all honourable gallant members of this House, and I know one is about to speak, and I'm glad he's returned to his place, for what they have done in their past careers to keep us all safe. But I would also like to pay tribute to the servicemen and women of my constituency of Harlow and the UK as a whole for their continuing service, keeping us and our families safe during these increasingly troubled times.
I now call Liberal Democrat spokesperson Helen Maguire.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today's motion may appear procedural, but it sits at the heart of how we govern our armed forces and, by extension, how we uphold parliamentary democracy and the rule of law. Under the Bill of Rights 1688, a standing army in peacetime must be consented to annually by Parliament. This annual renewal is not just constitutional housekeeping, it's a clear democratic statement that power in this country derives from Parliament and that our armed forces serve under law, not above it.
Hear, hear.
So I will of course support this continuation order. The Armed Forces Act 2006 provides the unified legal framework that enables our military to function. Without it, the service justice system would fall away, discipline could not be enforced, and commanding officers would be stripped of lawful authority. There would be no means to uphold the standards of service that we rightly expect. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, with that annual consent must come annual scrutiny. We owe it to those who serve under this Act to ensure that the political leadership they serve is worthy of their trust. The reality is that over recent years, Conservative governments have failed in their duty to our armed forces. While a brutal war raged in Europe, the previous government was cutting 10,000 troops from our army. Our armed forces are now smaller than they have been for generations at a time when global threats are escalating. Equipment programmes are routinely over budget and behind schedule. The National Audit Office has repeatedly warned about capability gaps in areas such as battlefield communications, armoured vehicles and naval readiness. And our service personnel are too often asked to do more with less, including living in unacceptable conditions with a housing system that does not meet their needs. The effectiveness of our armed forces depends not just on kit, but on people. And when those people are being let down, when we ask them to serve under a legal framework renewed by this House, we don't support them properly in practice, we are not keeping our side of the bargain. The Liberal Democrats are calling for a different path. We demand the reversal of these short-sighted troop cuts and a long-term plan to increase regular troop numbers back to over 100,000. That begins with immediate action, a new joining and re-enlistment bonus scheme to help recruit and retain at least 3,000 personnel, stabilising the force while we plan for future growth. We're also calling for cross-party talks to agree a sustainable path to meet NATO's new spending target of 5% of GDP, a goal that should be above party politics. The security of our country and our allies depends on serious, sustained commitment. And beyond strategy and numbers, we want to deliver a fair deal for those who serve. That means proper pay and decent conditions. It means high-quality housing that meets the decent home standard as a minimum. It means giving real support for transition to civilian life through access to mental health care, job opportunities and practical assistance for families who so often bear the strain behind the scenes. We press the government to deliver long overdue justice for LGBT veterans, many of whom are still awaiting compensation after years of discrimination and dismissal. That process must be fair, fast and comprehensive. We also demand full implementation of the Atherton report's recommendations to tackle the entrenched issues of harassment and misogyny faced by too many women in uniform. Service should never come with conditions of fear or inequality. And looking ahead, we understand a new Armed Forces Act is expected to be introduced in the next year. When this bill is brought forward, I will hold the government to a high standard. It must not be a copy and paste exercise. It must be an opportunity to improve the culture of our armed forces, ensuring equality, accountability and modernisation are at its heart. Madam Deputy Speaker, this continuation order maintains the legal foundation of our armed forces, but laws alone are not enough. We need leadership, we need commitment, and we need a government that does not simply consent to the military's existence once a year, but honours their service every single day with action, investment and respect. Thank you.
I call Ben Obsejecti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Armed Forces Act 2006 Continuation Order 2025 and would like to place on record my wholehearted support for our armed forces and the role they play in providing national security and the defence of this nation, both at home and deployed on operations across the globe. And last year, as a new MP, last year's continuation order was the first DL that I sat on, and I was very proud to be able to sign that. As a veteran and now the MP for a constituency in Huntingdon with British, US and wider NATO forces, I know firsthand how vital political support for our military is today. Although we've moved past the period of kinetic operations that typified my generation of warfare in Iraq and Afghanistan, the world feels more dangerous today than it did at that time. The Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 has precipitated a sea change in the nature of warfare. The manoeuvre warfare of old that we saw during the initial invasion, unchanged in a generation and familiar to those of my generation and the several before that, has been replaced by cyber, drones, grey zone, sub-threshold activity that feels like warfare that not so long ago would have been the preserve of science fiction or an episode of Black Mirror. It is this that in the thread that runs through the Strategic Defence Review, and it is this that we must ensure our armed forces are equipped to compete in across domains. I do not doubt the government's sentiment in wishing to increase defence spending to ensure we remain a credible and capable NATO ally and that we can continue to punch above our weight on the world stage. As an island nation in a notionally geographically safe part of the world, the legacy of our imperial past is one of world policing, post-colonial responsibility and expeditionary warfare. Our decentralised, persistent nuclear capability ensures we are a nation who continue to be taken seriously. But my concern is that we are in danger of being benched, as those NATO allies closer to the fray, who feel the threat from Russia on the eastern flank and the high north most keenly, will, with their vastly increased defence budgets and whole-of-society approaches to defence, make us a second-tier nation. The pledge to uplift defence spending to 5%, with the claim that we will achieve 4.1% by April 2027, is simply not credible, and this smoke and mirrors approach belies the fact that the sums do not add up. We saw only yesterday that the government's botched welfare reform has left a £4.5 billion gap in the spending plans, coupled with a further £1.25 billion from the winter fuel U-turn. Where will that money come from? Spending cuts or higher taxes are now inevitable, and growth projections look at best sluggish. Meanwhile, the government claims that it can reach 2.6% on defence plus security, but the government refuses to break down the quantum of that spending. How much of that 2.6% is actually on hard defence, and how much is on the intelligence services? By our estimates, it is somewhere in the region of 0.15%, which suggests that real defence budget as a proportion of GDP is only 2.45%. Bearing in mind that a sizable proportion of that figure is solely our continuous at-sea deterrent, and the figure for our conventional forces dropped to somewhere in the region of 1.7%. A long way from the numbers the government is putting forward. The 4.1% figure the government is now puffing its chest out about is 1.5% of national security and general resilience. This contains everything from UK arts spending to rural broadband. Under the chapter on pursuing asymmetric advantage, paragraph 25 details that the RRS Sir David Attenborough plays a part regarding understanding environmental changes in the Arctic Ocean, meaning that boating McBoatface is included in the Prime Minister's defence spending figures. Do we honestly think Russia and China will take that seriously? The huge capability commitments we see in the SDR and in the forthcoming equipment plan far outstrip our spending power. We are quite literally writing cheques that it feels unlikely we will ever be able to cash. Not only have we pledged to create an entirely new domain in cyber, but we are about to embark on an essential modernisation process that simply does not now look funded. On top of exquisite capability like the Global Combat Air Programme, a project not due to be delivered until the back end of the next decade, but one that runs the risk of being outpaced by technological change. In 20 years' time, will a sixth-generation fighter need to be crewed? It may in 2040, but GCAP's out-of-service date is likely to be beyond 2070. Do we honestly believe that crewed aircraft will be relevant by then, let alone how we will deliver the loyal wingmen in the system of systems that forms part of it? Drones are clearly the future of warfare, and whilst we continue to use Ukraine as the proving grounds for new capability against a near-peer adversary, the British Army should be on the front foot, rapidly equipping and training with drones, rather than using esports as the only drone warfare training of note. And I see the Minister there taking notes. Whilst he's writing stuff down, I would suggest that a two-stage warhead, a la Javelin, on an FPV drone is surely the next-generation anti-armour capability we need, thus consigning enfilade fire from a defilade position to a thing of the past, despite my own anti-tank roots. Meanwhile, Project Greyburn means that we will replace 150,000 SA-80A3 rifles by 2030, a significant logistical commitment, and not just in terms of changing the weapon system, but there are still discussions around changing the nature of the ammunition as well, and whilst that will increase stopping power, it will remove the purpose of 5.56, which I'm sure we won't need to go into in the chamber today, but everything that goes with that in terms of rifle racks, ammunition pouches, magazines, mag chargers, the nitty-gritty of changing a weapons platform that really does take its toll on exactly how we would implement that. We also intend to replace nearly 6,000 Land Rovers by 2030, another significant logistical commitment in terms of training soldiers to drive them, putting those vehicles out, making sure that we have the logistical trail in place to be able to service those vehicles. These smaller but still resource-intensive tasks place more and more strain on our personnel. Only today, I understand the MOD police have cut 1,500 roles, with the MPGS under-resourced, unable to replace them, and the burden has fallen upon regular soldiers to augment their guarding taskings. And additional taskings like this, with weekend guards, is one of the factors that erodes goodwill and continues to contribute towards retention problems. Only a few weeks ago, I was in Poland visiting the RAF, conducting the NATO air policing role, interdicting Russian penetration along NATO's border. The personnel there were rightly extremely proud to serve, but at the same time the strain that the current operational tempo was placing upon those in specialist roles was immense, requiring them to repeatedly spend long periods away from home. Incredibly, the additional penalty that they pay is a financial one, with all but those on the highest LSA bands finding that the additional pay they receive for being separated from their families is often at best negligible, at worst a financial hit. And I mean that in terms of the second order effects, that an individual who may be being paid more to be on operations isn't physically at home to help out with the tasks at home, which means that you have to pay for a babysitter rather than having your spouse there to look after them. I mean, you have to pay for a dog walker rather than be able to leave the dog at home when the spouse will return home. Those costs add up and they simply aren't factored into those extra payments that people receive for being on tour. Meanwhile, we continue to see those who have already served their nation questioning whether they continue to enjoy the support of the nation they risk their lives to serve. The concerns around the treatment of Northern Ireland veterans have Operation Banner veterans rightly very concerned about their futures and being held accountable for actions from over 50 years ago. Without clarity that protections will be guaranteed for those who serve their country, there is potentially a huge issue that future recruitment will suffer with a loss of confidence that serving your country won't, under this government, see you treated as a criminal one day. It raises questions over my own service and that of my peers that the goalposts could one day move for us. And I know that applies to both sides of the House, and I see that the Security Minister there on the front bench who served so proudly in Afghanistan as well. I do welcome the Armed Forces Act 2006 Continuation Order 2025, just as I was proud to play my small part in the history of one of our finest institutions. I recognise and acknowledge the sentiment and intent of the Defence Ministers to deliver for our service personnel, and I don't call that into question for 1 second. But I would also wish to place on record my concerns that the limitations placed upon them by Treasury accounting will mean that cross-party consensus on defence is at risk from the smoke and mirrors approach to hitting our NATO pledges. The fiscal rules and botched legislation that will reduce the Chancellor's spending power and a dangerous new world that this government must demonstrate their front-footed commitment to with tangible results, not just pledges.
Saoirse Eastwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I simply want to contribute today as the MP for Lagan Valley, which is the home of Army HQ in Northern Ireland. I too am proud of my family members that served both in the Army, the regular Army, UDR and the RUC. However, I would like to depart from some members of the House where I would say that they were professional in everything that they did, and they would agree with me, as would many others across this House and indeed in Northern Ireland, that they didn't serve above the law, they served within the law, as any professional soldier will do. I also want to pay tribute to the Royal British Legion, Lisburn and Dromore branches, who have been incredible in supporting veterans, not just throughout Lagan Valley, but indeed across wider Northern Ireland, and making sure that they are at the fore of both civic and remembrance events, particularly Brian Sloan from Lisburn Royal British Legion. I also want to echo some of the remarks by the Shadow Front Bench in terms of the cadets, something that people really often overlook, and actually we're very blessed in Lagan Valley to have both the Sea Cadets, the RAF Cadets and the Army. And every time I look at those young people, it really does make my heart feel proud and a wee bit more confident for the future. We are in a very changed security situation, and I think everybody in this House knows that. And one of the challenges that the Minister has referenced in his opening remarks has been that of recruitment and retention. And I think we have to change sometimes the dial whenever we're discussing these things, because there should be an opportunity for our young people. I often hear young people maligned and marginalised, but actually those are the young people that are going to be our engineers of the future, our strategic ops planners of the future, and really are desperately wanting to find meaning sometimes in life and wanting to find that through service. And I think that's exactly what the cadets provide. So I just want to put on record my thanks to those who are serving, gallant members throughout the House, people who have served within Lagan Valley. I have their complete and utter back in all of this. I'm very proud of them. I'm proud of what they've done, and also lastly a word for their families too, because there's also a hidden shift that people don't often see, a hidden threat that many are still dealing with years from now, and I think it's really important that we vitally remember those people who have served. Thank you.
Are you hoping to... David Reid.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise today to raise an important point that has been reported in the media over the last 24 hours. And it's about the future of the Royal Marines. And as a former Royal Marine myself and the Member of Parliament that represents the Commando Training Centre in Lympstone, this is an issue I think that we need to discuss now, and I hope the Minister will be able to give some answers. So it's been reported that the Royal Marines are moving away from their conventional amphibious operations and that large-scale beach landings with traditional force protections from sea are being replaced with small, flexible teams designed to operate alongside special forces. Let me be clear, I think adaptability is vital, and I'm sure that there's many merits in this point and this direction of travel. But it's so important that the Minister comes forward and tells the House and gives the opportunity to be able to discuss this. And I do worry that abandoning hard-won capabilities without clear and credible replacement is not adaptation, it's risk. So I'd like to put some questions to the Minister. Is the government removing the United Kingdom's amphibious warfare capability? And if so, what replaces it? What is the long-term plan to project force from sea to land, if not through the Royal Marines in their traditional role? The multi-role support ships that are meant to underpin this new commando force concept, we have no delivery dates, there's no detailed plan and no answer on whether it will be a genuine operational flexibility or a simply scaled-back presence. Will the MRSS be able to deploy full commando units at scale in high-threat environments, or is it designed purely for small team operations? And if the latter, is that now the full extent of our national amphibious ambitions? And then this goes on to the issue around special forces support. I know it's an issue that we can't really discuss in the chamber. We're the Security Minister who served the Special Force Support Group, so I understand that we won't be able to discuss it in great detail. But it's been reported that 40 Commando has been tasked to operate alongside the Special Boat Service in sensitive national missions, including evacuations and hostage rescue. So what does this mean for the Royal Marines' contribution to the Special Forces Support Group? Is the SFSG being restructured or reassigned? Madam Deputy Speaker, I think this goes into a deeper point, especially to our NATO allies, and if we are talking in the Strategic Defence Review about being NATO first, NATO have long counted on the UK's high-end amphibious expertise. It matters to our national resilience in a world where rapid deployment from sea is often the only option. And above all, it matters to the men and women who serve and who deserve clarity about their future roles, mission and identity. So I urge the Minister to come forward with honest, detailed answers, not slogans or spin, but clarity on capability, posture and intent. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, defence policy cannot be made in stealth.
Final contribution from Mr Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for bringing forward this order in the House today. Just a few questions to him on it in regards to contributions that have been made by other honourable members, and many have talked about the value of our cadet services in regards to the promotion of young people, the value that it gives, and also that additional skill training that is provided. It was concerning when I met some of the cadets in Northern Ireland that some of their senior officers were actually reporting that there was a fall in their core support, their core financial support, the core grant that they receive from the Ministry of Defence. And I would like clarity from the Minister under this order, if that was in fact true, that he would take the opportunity to reverse it, because it's not a large sum of money in regards to the overall spend of the Ministry of Defence, and even in regards to the projections that are being talked about today. So the cadets provide a valuable service, and I think in the recognition, so should the financial support that is given to them can also be given as well. Just in regard to that continued support, and the Minister and I have had many exchanges in this and will continue to have, and that's about the investment not just in our service personnel but also the facilities and the bases that they provide. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I refer specifically to Northern Ireland, and the Minister knows in regards to Aldergrove as to the facility that can be to all our armed forces as a strategic location in our national defence in regards to that. And I would like to hear, even if under the SDR there is a possibility of further investment there. But again, just in a final point, I would like to pay our tribute and thanks to all those current service personnel and former serving personnel. The Shadow Minister made reference to it of the debate that's coming in this place on the 14th of July, and I would encourage all members to participate in regards to that, so that our veterans can actually see the support that members of this House actually have for that. And in finishing, to be local again, like other members have, could I ask the Minister to join me in congratulating the branches of Ballyclare and Randallstown Royal British Legion, who this year have celebrated their 100th anniversary in regards to service of personnel through wars from all that, and continue to serve and actually support serving personnel at this moment in time.
We now come to the front benches, and I call the Shadow Minister, Mark Francois.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think we've had a good debate, lively at times, but about an important subject. And again, for the avoidance of doubt, we will loyally support this order, which I'm sure the House will pass without the need for a division. We had some very good speeches, including from the member for Huntingdon. He recalled some of his time serving as an infantry platoon commander. I too had that same honour, although in my case as a Cold War reservist rather than as a regular in his. The member for Exmouth East asked a number of questions about the future of the Royal Marines, now that the government has flogged off most of our amphibious shipping, and asked for some confirmation about timings on the MSSS class, and what happens to the Royal Marines now in their amphibious role. Perhaps the Minister could provide the House with some reassurance. And if it is true that the Royal Marines, at least in the short term, are going to lose their amphibious role, can I ask him, were the Parachute Regiment consulted on that decision? Also, the member for South Antrim. I see the Hansard must record that the Security Minister is chuckling at this point. Yes, I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I see the Security Minister chuckling away. I'd also like confirmation that, as part of the Big Three, that the RAF Regiment were also consulted on that decision as well.
I think the RAF Regiment have had other things on their mind lately. Could I congratulate the member for South Antrim for raising the important issue of Northern Ireland? And that takes me on to where I would like to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker. I hope when the Minister replies, he can answer some of my questions about what will happen to our Northern Ireland veterans. Again, for the avoidance of doubt, I think I know where his heart lies on this, and I can't recall whether or not the Security Minister served in Northern Ireland. He's nodding that I know he certainly served with great distinction in Afghanistan, so he too will understand this. We have to believe on these benches that in the privacy of discussions between government departments, they are doing the right thing. And perhaps the Minister can give some assurance to those 300,000 veterans who served on Loch Banner, those who are still with us, that they will remove the sword of Damocles that hangs over them and allow those people who served our country so bravely and with such distinction in incredibly difficult circumstances to sleep safely in their beds as they deserve.
I call the Minister, Minister Luke Holland.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank all members for their contributions to this debate. It was a good one. I'll refer very briefly, if I can, in closing to a number of the issues that have been raised. First, Madam Deputy Speaker, I detect strong support for our armed forces on all sides of the House, so I hope there won't be a division very shortly, and that is good to see. I think this debate has shown actually the merit in holding the annual order on the floor of the House, but I suspect I will need to have a word with the Leader of the House and the whips before I commit to any future ones of those, because that is definitely outside my swim lane. Can I thank the member for Lagan Valley in particular for talking about cadets? It is absolutely right that we invest more in cadets, and that is why the Strategic Defence Review set out our ambition to increase the size of our cadet force by 30%. A really strong investment in the future of our young people, providing opportunities not just to get lifetimes of skills, increased confidence and opportunities, but also to provide a pathway for young people to serve in our armed forces to really realise the benefits. And having seen the cadets on parade at on Plymouth Hoe for Armed Forces Day at the weekend. I know there's strong support for them in every part of the country, but I'm grateful for her in particular for raising that. And I think the line that I noticed down, young people find meaning through service, and I couldn't agree more. So I'm grateful for that contribution. In relation to the Shadow Minister who asked me a number of questions, we have to renew the Armed Forces Act every 5 years. That will be renewed in the proper way. We're looking at what is necessary to update that legislation, especially as it would be coming after the publication of the Strategic Defence Review. He will be familiar that the Strategic Defence Review made the case for a Defence Readiness Bill as part of that, and we are looking across all those details, and I can reassure him that as part of the commitment that we have shown, indeed with the wide consultation that we've undertaken with the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill, that we will continue that in that spirit for future legislation. In relation to that, he may have missed it, but just before Prime Minister's questions today, it was Northern Ireland questions, and I believe the Northern Ireland Secretary at the dispatch box raised a number of the issues, or replied to some questions on the number of issues he spoke about, so I might refer him to those remarks, because as he will know, if only because I say this every time he asks me a question on it, these are matters for the Northern Ireland Office, but clearly Defence has strong equities and views on these matters as well. Go on.
I was watching Northern Ireland questions. From memory, the Northern Ireland Secretary said they would address this through primary legislation, but he gave no indication of any kind as to what happens to the outstanding remedial order. So if they can't answer that today, perhaps the Minister or the Northern Ireland Office could write to us and tell us where we stand.
As he will know, because I have had a similar conversation in a variety of different formats in recent weeks, as a matter for the Northern Ireland Office, the policy intention is to repeal and, importantly, replace the Unlawful Legacy Act. It's been found to be unlawful. It doesn't enjoy community support. It does need to be repealed and replaced, and any government that was elected in July would have to do that. Happy to.
I'm very grateful to him for allowing me to intervene again. I just want to say to him, this point about not enjoying community support, when we were having these debates in great detail, the highly divided communities would always stand up and say how this was unacceptable and how that was unacceptable, and then quietly they would come up to us, their representatives, and say, for goodness sake, go on doing what you're doing. So you may have some legal, the Minister may have some legal problems to overcome, but let him not be fooled by what is said in public about what really needs to be done.
Minister.
I thank him for his contribution, and indeed it is a matter that my colleagues in the Northern Ireland Office follow closely on this one, as they're the lead department with responsibility for the repealing and replacing of the Legacy Act, and I'm certain that he will continue making suggestions in that way. It's not for me to make announcements on the Northern Ireland Office behalf, but I am certain they will have listened to the Right Honourable Gentleman and what he has had to say in relation to this. I'm also grateful for the remarks from the member for Huntingdon, who I believe I told him just before this, I look forward to seeing him on the front bench in a shadow defence role very soon. I have to say, as he knows, I'm a big fan of what he has to say, and I do like the way that he brings his military expertise and a certain good defence nerdery, which as a defence nerd on this side I appreciate very much so, in relation to that. But perhaps I would just say politely to him that the experience that I have seen from engaging with our allies on NATO's eastern flank, from Finland, the Baltic states, and all the way down through passing Belarus and others, is that the nations there value the relationship with the United Kingdom even more in over the recent past year. We have strong relations with the JEF nations of Northern Europe, and we continue to have deeper relations with our Baltic friends, including enhancing the forward land force that we have in Estonia, and our cooperation and support for Latvia and Lithuania at this time. So I don't recognise the concern, but he's right to raise it, if only to allow me to put that on the record, that we have strong support from those nations, and indeed we strongly support them in wanting to be sovereign and free from Russian aggression. I would politely say to him that Sir David Attenborough does provide a really important presence in the Antarctic region, and he will know, if he hasn't yet discovered polar region nerdery, can I recommend that to him, because the presence that both HMS Protector, our ice ship, and also the Sir David Attenborough provide there is not only really important presence support for our Arctic missions and Antarctic missions, but also help us honour our obligations under the Antarctic Treaty, which is a really important part of the rules-based framework for the protection of the Antarctic, which is really important. Happy to.
Well, I thank the Minister for giving way. On that point about the Arctic and HMS Protector, what plans do we have to procure an actual icebreaker in order to increase our footprint in that region?
Minister.
Oh, I knew he was tempted to go into polar nerdery, and so I'll be very happy speaking to him about some of those aspects. Clearly, when it comes to some of the provisions of our ships and capabilities in there, it's not just an MOD matter, it's one that we share, in particular with our Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office colleagues, but I'm happy picking that up with him, certainly. I'm not certain he's right on everything he said on drones, but nonetheless, he is certainly right when he says drone warfare has fundamentally changed how warfare is conducted. And when it comes to defence spending, I'm very proud that we have a plan to return to 2.5% of defence, a figure not met since 2010. And we do need to spend more on defence because we live in more dangerous times. The member for Harlow spoke about the sacrifice that armed forces families make, and he's exactly right to do so. It's something that we should not forget. Indeed, that is the reason why in the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill we deliberately extend the powers of the Commissioner to have a requirement to engage with the family members of armed forces of our people who serve, which is really important. And I'm grateful for the member for Epsom Ewell for her contributions. Can I say to her that we do indeed have a government that honours the service of our armed forces every day. I'm very proud to serve within it. But she's also right to raise the issue of LGBT veterans. She will know that the prioritisation that we've decided as ministers is that the initial payments, as we stand up the system to make payments, should be directed at those people who are over 80 or facing a terminal condition. We have completed that work. That was the right prioritisation in the first instance, so justice can be done with those folks who may not see many more days. We're now standing up that wider system so we can process that wider set of payments that we've committed to do, and we'll continue to do so. Finally, Madam Speaker, just in relation to the questions from the member for Exeter and Exmouth East, the Future Commando Force strategy that was published under the last government did indeed move away from full commando assault to small raiding parties. That was the extent policy of the last government. Because of that, I'd be happy speaking to him about it. We have a strong commitment to the amphibious role of the Royal Marines. We have a commitment to MRSS that was in the Strategic Defence Review. Be very happy speaking to him further on this as an MP who has a Royal Marine base in my constituency, as indeed he has in his. I'm going to have to conclude, I'm afraid, in terms of time, but I'm very happy meeting him to discuss this further. But I can reassure him that the Royal Marines has a very bright, strong future in our armed forces. Go on then.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think this raises a more fundamental question. Just like the release of the Strategic Defence Review to trade bodies, to the press beforehand, we're reading about this in the press, but not having the opportunity to discuss this in Parliament. So I welcome the offer to have a conversation about it with the Minister, but why can't we have the conversation in the Chamber now? Thank you.
Well, if I can refer him to all the debates I called on the future of the Royal Marines under the last government to make the case that the Royal Marines had a bright future when I was indeed sat on opposition benches. We have a strong commitment to the future of the Royal Marines. We have a strong commitment to amphibiosity. He will know the changes that his government introduced in terms of the future Commando Force strategy. And indeed, if you look at the lessons from Ukraine, indeed the Royal Marines were actually well ahead of the learnings that we now see from there. Happy discussing it with him further. I'm sure he'll want to table a Westminster Hall debate so we can discuss this even more, but I can reassure him and indeed the House that the future of the Royal Marines is safe and secure. We have a strong commitment to amphibiosity. We need to make sure that all our fighting forces adapt to the changed environment in which they operate, and certainly as someone who represents Stonehouse Barracks, the spiritual home of the Royal Marines, it's something that I feel personally about. Don't recognise the concerns he raised, but I'm very glad on a cross-party basis there's strong support for armed forces and indeed for this continuation of order. Thank you very much.
The question is, as on the order papers, may that opinion say aye? Aye. Of the contrary, no? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I'll give the ministers a few moments to shuffle over before we start on the next item of business. Motion number 4 on prevention and suppression of terrorism. Minister to move. Minister Dan Jarvis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the Terrorism Act 2000 Prescribed Organisations Amendment Order of 2025, which was laid before the House on the 30th of June, be approved. I'm grateful to the House for its consideration of this draft order, which will see 3 distinct groups prescribed. They are Maniacs Murder Cult, Palestine Action and the Russian Imperial Movement. I'm going to make a bit of progress. I think it is not unreasonable. The prescription of these 3 organisations will reaffirm the UK's zero-tolerance approach to terrorism, regardless of its form or underlying ideology. Now, first, Madam Deputy Speaker, it may be helpful if I set out some background to the prescription power. To prescribe an organisation, the Home Secretary must reasonably believe that it is concerned in terrorism. This means that the organisation commits or participates in terrorism, it prepares for terrorism, it promotes or encourages terrorism, or it is otherwise concerned in terrorism. Some 80 terrorist organisations are currently prescribed under the Terrorism Act of 2000. Prescription is, rightly, ideologically neutral. It judges an organisation on its actions and the actions it is willing to deploy in pursuit of its cause. The UK's definition of terrorism was established in law a quarter of a century ago, and it has stood the test of time and extensive scrutiny since. I'll make a little bit of progress and then I will give way. It has 3 limbs. 1, the use or threat of action must reach a certain level of seriousness, such as serious violence or serious damage to property. 2, the use or threat must be designed to influence a government or intimidate the public or a section of the public. And 3, the use or threat must be made for the purpose of advancing a political, religious, racial or ideological cause. Successive independent reviewers of terrorism legislation have upheld the UK's terrorism definition as effective and fit for purpose, even as the threat from terrorism has evolved. I'll give way in just a moment. Madam Deputy Speaker, prescription is one of the most powerful counter-terrorism tools available to government. Any decision to prescribe is taken with great care and following rigorous consideration, as noted by Jonathan Hall KC in his report on the operation of the Terrorism Acts of 2022. I will give way to the right honourable gentleman.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Minister for giving way, and I'm grateful to him for that. I think the question that many of us want to put to him is, why has he linked these 3 organisations together? He clearly has made a judgment on each of the 3 organisations independently of each other. And I think it would be fair, and I'm sure many outside would think it would be fair, if we were taking individual votes on the 3. Because many of us are very concerned about the issue facing Palestine Action, and that is the issue that we wish to address in the debate here today.
Mr Dan Jarvis.
I can say to the right honourable gentleman that I will come on and explain with real clarity precisely why we have proceeded in the way that we have. But I suspect that he has a long memory, and he will recall, I'm sure, that when he's voted against prescribing a number of organisations previously, including Al-Qaeda in 2001, that particular motion was bundled along with 20 other militant organisations. So there is clear precedent for doing this. And I can say to him, the reason that we seek to do it is to demonstrate that we don't attach any kind of ideological prism with which to seek to make a judgment. The Home Secretary will take a view based on a legal threshold, and that is the basis on which we have proceeded. I'll give way to the honourable member.
First of all, can I thank the Minister for bringing this forward, and Minister, my party will be supporting government and putting this. And if it does come to a vote, as some I think might indicate they wish to do, we'll support government and Labour, because security. Coming from Northern Ireland, we understand what it means to have security and what it's important to have. Government and ministers and the police and the army and MI5 and MI6 all have the responsibility. Minister, this question I want to ask. In relation to the membership of those organisations, will it be the intention of the Minister to, is there a list of Palestine Action, for instance? Is there a list of those who may be members? I don't know where they are. There might be some in this House, perhaps. But if there is, perhaps maybe we'll understand, and will they be subject to the rulings of prescription as well? Thank you.
Look, I'm grateful to him for his intervention, and I know that he speaks with great authority on these matters, born out of his extensive experience of dealing with these matters in Northern Ireland. Can I just say to him that if he's just a little bit patient, and if the House allows me to make a bit of progress, then I will explain and respond to the point that he's raised and the point that other honourable members are seeking to raise. So if the House will allow, I will now turn to the specific measures before the House today, taking each of the proposed additions to the list of prescribed organisations in order. Madam Deputy Speaker, first, the Maniacs Murder Cult, also known as MMC. MMC is an insidious, white supremacist, neo-Nazi organisation that operates online and across borders. It aims to encourage individuals to engage in acts of violence against people that it perceives as antisocial, including homeless people, drug addicts and migrants, all to further its own ideology and degrade human society through violence. The government assesses that MMC commits, prepares for and promotes and encourages acts of terrorism. MMC members and leaders have claimed a number of violent attacks globally that were committed in pursuit of the group's aims. MMC supplies instructional material that could increase the capability or motivation of an aspiring attacker, including a guide which provides information on how to fatally attack someone with a knife and use a vehicle as a weapon. Members and non-members share MMC's material and other online content, including videos of violent attacks to encourage further violence in support of its ideology. On the 22nd of May, a 21-year-old Georgian national, considered to be one of MMC's leaders, known as Commander Butcher, was extradited to the United States and is set to stand trial in New York for soliciting hate crimes and acts of mass violence. As set out in the indictment, he is alleged to have recruited individuals online to promote MMC's ideologies by committing acts of murder, arson, bombing and mass poisoning in New York, targeted specifically at members of ethnic minority groups, homeless people and Jewish school children. As this case illustrates, MMC has a truly transnational audience, including the UK. It does not matter where the leaders of this network are based if they are capable of inspiring acts of violence and terror in any country. Vulnerable individuals, such as minors, are particularly exposed to the horrific material MMC publishes and distributes online. This government will not stand by and allow the terrorist threat and wider societal harms caused by the MMC to persist. Prescribing MMC is key to help deter and divert individuals from engaging with MMC's violent content and sends a clear signal to social media companies to remove MMC's material from their platforms. The threat posed by MMC must be taken extremely seriously, whether they are inspiring acts of violence against our people or influencing young people to commit those acts. We will not hesitate to take action against groups like these to keep our country safe.
Yeah.
I will give way, yeah.
The Minister for giving way, and I agree with him that it clearly meets the threshold very significantly. But I'm bound to ask the question: when did the actions of MMC first come to the attention of the government, and why has it left it so long to bring forward this proposal, and why has it simply left it until the point when it's politically convenient to bring it forward?
I'm sorry that the honourable member has chosen to make that final point. There is no political convenience in what we are seeking to do today. What we are seeking to do today is ensure the security of our country. And if he's just a little bit patient, let me further make that case to him and to the House. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me turn now to Palestine Action. The public attention it has garnered should not be confused with legitimacy, and nor should a group formed 5 years ago be conflated with the legitimate campaign for Palestinian rights and statehood, which has existed in our country and in this House for more than 5 decades. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me be clear. The prescription of Palestine Action does not seek to ban protest that supports Palestine. There are many ways in which people can continue to lawfully express their support for Palestine without being a member or a supporter of Palestine Action. I will give way, yes.
I thank the Minister for giving way. The Minister will be aware that the High Court has granted Palestine Action permission for a legal challenge. Rather than the Home Secretary, who is not here today, rushing it through Parliament, shouldn't this be delayed until the judicial process has concluded?
Well, I can say to the honourable member, we're certainly not seeking to rush it through Parliament. These are matters that the Home Secretary and I have considered for some time. With regard to the point that she made about legal challenge, there is a clear route to legal challenge. Should an organisation be proscribed, it has the opportunity to pursue a legal route of challenge. That is entirely within the right of any organisation who are proscribed to do so, and that is a matter for them. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me make this point because I think it's an important one. Freedom of expression and assembly are cornerstones of our democracy. They are fundamental rights, and this government will always respect and protect them. We will always defend the right of the British people to engage in legitimate and peaceful protest and to stand up for the causes in which they believe. I will give way, yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Madam Deputy Speaker, I often show visitors the statue of Lord Falkland and the missing spur removed when the suffragettes chained themselves to it. And I was here when protesters superglued their buttocks to the glass panel there, causing quite some scandal and damage. My point is, will the Minister confirm that criminal damage, no matter how creatively or indeed scandalously undertaken, will always be treated under criminal law and is not treated as terrorist acts?
Well, I am grateful to her for her intervention, and I know that she's given this matter very serious consideration, and it's an interesting point that she makes. And I will seek, as I progress, to evidence to her and to others why we've taken to choose this particular course of action with this particular group. And I hope when I've made my speech that she will understand the reasons why we are proceeding in the way that we are. Madam Deputy Speaker, I was just making the point about the importance of the right to protest. But essential as these rights are, they do not provide a blank cheque for this particular group to seriously damage property or subject members of the public to fear and violence. I will give way.
Diane Abbott.
On the question of Palestine Action, the Minister will be aware that very many of us in this chamber think that Palestine Action is in a different category from the other two organisations he's seeking to prescribe. And can I ask him, is he aware that several UN special rapporteurs, including those protecting human rights, say that they have contacted the UK government to say that acts of protest that damage property but are not intended to kill or injure people should not be treated as terrorism?
Well, I am grateful to the Mother of the House because I think she makes an important point. Before I respond to it, let me just say very politely and very gently, I hope, to her and to others, if the actions of the particular group that we are considering at the moment had been conducted by an organisation who held different ideological motives, my strong sense is that she and some of her colleagues would be strongly recommending that the government moved to prescribe them. I have to say that that is, I'm afraid, the conclusion that I have arrived at. Now, she specifically mentioned the point about the United Nations. We did, as a government, receive a letter from the UN Special Procedures mandate holders. This was at the end of 2024, and the UK government provided a full response to this, which has been published. But I would just sort of gently say to her that ultimately, matters relating to our national security and ensuring that we keep the public safe are very much matters for this country and not for other organisations. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Minister, can I just put on record that this heavy-handed approach threatens basic freedoms and sets a dangerous precedent for all political dissent in the UK? Does he acknowledge that?
Minister.
I don't acknowledge that, and I don't accept his characterisation of the decision that we have taken. And if you'll just listen to what I have to say in a moment, I hope that he will understand why we're progressing in the way that we are. Madam Deputy Speaker, the attack at Bryce Norton on the 20th of June has, quite understandably, provoked shock and anger in this House and across the country. But the reality is that this was just the latest episode in Palestine Action's long history of harmful activity. Palestine Action has orchestrated a nationwide campaign of property damage featuring attacks that have resulted in serious damage to property and crossed the threshold from direct criminal action into terrorism. And I hope that goes some way to responding to the point that my honourable friend made just a moment ago. Palestine Action members have used violence against people responding at the scene of attacks. For their roles in coordinated attacks, members of the organisation have been charged with serious offences, including violent disorder, grievous bodily harm with intent, and aggravated burglary, which is an offence involving a weapon.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I thank him for some of the things that he's been saying. I just wanted to kind of pick up on the fact that all that he's spoken about there could be dealt with under criminal law. And the other thing was, when my honourable friend mentioned about the suffragettes, I think we need to put into context a little bit of history here, that when the suffragettes carried out a campaign of window smashing, poster paint defacement, cutting telegraph and railway lines, targeted bombing and arson, specifically avoiding harming people, I think we have to understand that there is a long history in this country of direct action which pushes the boundaries of our democracy. It's very difficult for all of us, but actually they are still direct action. It's not terrorist action.
So I acknowledge his point about the history, and I think that that is entirely reasonable context for him and others to raise. But ultimately, this government has to respond to events that are taking place in the here and now. And this government has to take sometimes difficult decisions about what measures are required in order to keep the public safe. And he's absolutely within his rights to seek to make comparisons about other groups. But as I will explain in just a moment, fundamentally, the Home Secretary has to take a view about whether a legal threshold has been crossed. And if it is, she has to make a judgment about whether she's wishing to proceed. I'm going to have to make a bit of progress because I still have some way to go. I'm going to make some progress. So despite some of the rhetoric to the contrary, the group's own materials have stated that the organisation is not non-violent, which is echoed in the actions of its members who have committed atrocious attacks. Having carefully considered all the evidence, the Home Secretary has concluded that Palestine Action is concerned in terrorism and should be prescribed. Now, the House will understand that I am unable to comment on specific intelligence or go into details about incidents that are sub judice. However, I can provide a summary of the group's activities, and it is right that I make that position clear to the House. Since its inception in 2020, Palestine Action has orchestrated and enacted a campaign of direct criminal action against businesses and institutions, including key national infrastructure and defence firms that provide services and supplies to support Ukraine, NATO, our Five Eyes allies, and the UK defence industry. Over time, and most notably since the start of 2024, Palestine Action's activity has increased in frequency and severity. Its targets have broadened to include financial firms, charities, universities and government buildings. Its methods have become more aggressive, with its members demonstrating a willingness to use violence. I will give way, but I then do need to make some progress.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving me, because he's spoken about the history of some of this, and there is more recent history. The last government brought in the Public Order Act in order to deal with Extinction Rebellion. At that point, the Home Secretary, when she was on the shadow front bench, listed all the various crimes that could be dealt with. And she said then, the government are extending powers that we would normally make available just for serious violence and terrorism to peaceful protest. Police officers themselves have said that this is a serious restriction on a person's rights to protest and in reality is unworkable. She was right then, wasn't she? And she's wrong today.
And I'm going to make a bit of progress because I hope to answer some of the points that I'm about to explain to him specific incidences that have informed the decision that have happened recently. So I understand why he may not necessarily want to listen to that, but I would invite him to do so because it is very important context. I'm going to make some progress now. So some of Palestine Action's own materials state, we are not non-violent and we have specific targets. The group has a footprint in all 45 policing regions in the UK and has pledged to escalate its campaign. Madam Deputy Speaker, this disgraceful pattern of activity cannot be allowed to continue. Now, in applying the legislative framework, the government assesses that Palestine Action commits acts of terrorism. In several attacks, Palestine Action has committed acts of serious damage to property with the aim of progressing its political cause. I'm not going to give way because I need to get these important points down on the record. With the aim of progressing its political cause and intimidating and influencing the public and the government. These include attacks at Thales in Glasgow 2022 and last year at Insto Precision in Kent and Elbit Systems UK in Bristol. In such attacks, Palestine Action members have forced entry onto premises armed with a variety of weapons and damaged or demolished property, causing millions of pounds worth of criminal damage. As the House has heard, Palestine Action members have used violence against people responding at the scene. Now, during Palestine Action's attack against the Thales defence factory in Glasgow in 2022, the group caused over £1 million worth of damage, including parts that are essential to our submarines. Palestine Action caused panic amongst staff who feared for their safety as pyrotechnics and smoke bombs were thrown in the area where they were evacuating. The sheriff, when passing custodial sentences for the perpetrators, said, and I quote, "Throwing pyrotechnics into areas where people are being evacuated could hardly be described as being non-violent." The government also assess that Palestine Action prepares for terrorism. The organisation has provided practical advice to assist its members with conducting significant levels of property damage at targets right across the UK. For example, Palestine Action released an underground manual which encourages its members to create small groups or cells and provides guidance about how to conduct activity against private companies and government buildings. It explains how to operate covertly to evade arrest and provides a link to a website also created by Palestine Action, which contains a map of target locations across the UK. And the government assesses that Palestine Action promotes and encourages terrorism. This includes the glorification of its attacks involving serious property damage on social media. Palestine Action's attacks are not victimless crimes. Employees have experienced physical violence, intimidation, and harassment. They have been prevented from entering their place of work. We would not tolerate this activity from organisations motivated by Islamist or extreme right-wing ideology, and we cannot tolerate it from Palestine Action. Now, by implementing this measure, we will remove Palestine Action's veil of legitimacy, tackle its financial support, and degrade its efforts to recruit and radicalise people into committing terrorist activity in its name. But we must be under no illusion. Palestine Action is not a legitimate protest group. People engaged in lawful protest don't need weapons. People engaged in lawful protest do not throw smoke bombs and fire pyrotechnics around innocent members of the public. And people engaged in lawful protest do not cause millions of pounds of damage to national security infrastructure, including submarines and defence equipment for NATO. Prescribing Palestine Action will not impinge on people's right to protest. Those who wish lawfully to protest or express support for Palestine have always been able to and can continue to do so. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am conscious of time, and that is why I want to turn very briefly to the Russian Imperial Movement, or RIM. RIM is a white supremacist, ethno-nationalist organisation that seeks to create a new Russian imperial state. The methods RIM use to try to achieve those aims threaten UK, Euro-Atlantic and wider international security and prosperity. RIM conducts combat activity via its paramilitary unit, the Russian Imperial Legion, and has actively fought alongside Russian forces and other pro-Russian right-wing extremist groups in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. In doing so, the government assesses that it has committed or participated in acts of terrorism. RIM also prepares for terrorism. It manages a paramilitary training programme known as Partisan, which increases the capabilities of attendees to conduct terrorist attacks. By prescribing RIM, the UK will reinforce our steadfast support of Ukraine in its resistance to Russian aggression and our commitment to counter future threats from extreme right-wing terrorism in the UK and Europe. Madam Deputy Speaker, almost 2 years ago, it was my task, on behalf of what was then His Majesty's opposition, to strongly support the action taken to proscribe the Wagner Group, an organisation which rightly stood condemned for its acts of indiscriminate violence and terror in Ukraine and elsewhere. And I hope that the whole House will be as united as it was on that occasion in endorsing the action today taken against the Russian imperial movement. Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, the first duty of government is to keep our country safe. When our collective security and our values are threatened, we will not hesitate to act. Today's prescriptions will send a clear and unambiguous message that this Parliament stands against terrorism, however and wherever it manifests itself. Only in applying the UK's counter-terrorism framework without bias can we maintain confidence in it. I therefore urge members to support these prescriptions, and I commend the order to the House.
The question is as on the order paper. Before I call those shadow minister, colleagues will have noted that on the order paper, this debate is only 90 minutes long, has to conclude at 5:27, which means that backbenchers will be on a speaking limit of 4 minutes to begin with, and only a few colleagues will get in as the debate has to conclude at 5:27. I call the Shadow Minister, Harriet Cross.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Minister for his statement and for bringing this important and very necessary measure to the House. And I also thank him for the briefing I was provided with earlier today. And let us be very clear what these measures are and are not about. Do we support free speech? Yes. Do we support the right to protest? Yes. Do we support the freedom of expression? Yes. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, these very freedoms that make our democracy is exactly the freedoms that these groups are considering and putting at risk, and why this is needed today. The groups we are discussing, Palestine Action, Maniac's Murder Cult and Russian Imperial Movement, have nothing whatsoever to do with legitimate protest. They would not be facing proscription today if they were demonstrating peacefully, respectfully or legally. And so, as so many groups and organisations across the country do and must continue to be able to do freely. These groups have chosen a different path entirely, and for that, this action is rightly being taken against them. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must be clear-eyed about the broader threat landscape we face. Yes, of course.
appreciate the Shadow Minister for giving way, but does she agree with me that the only acceptable form of protest is polite protest? That's not protest, that's permission.
RAF planes on the ground.
The right to protest is a hugely important part of our democracy. We support the right to protest. We support the right to free speech. We do not support the right to criminal damage, to intimidation, to threats to the public. And that is exactly what these groups are doing, and that is why they're being prescribed, quite rightly, today.
Very good.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said, we must be clear-eyed about the broader threat landscape that we face. Terrorism remains one of the most serious threats to our national security. Whether it comes from international networks, from those radicalised online, from extremist groups operating on our soil, the threat is real, it is evolving, and it must demand our constant vigilance. Our security services work tirelessly, day and night, to keep us safe. They have disrupted countless plots that the public will never know about. But we cannot be complacent. The nature of terrorism has changed, from sophisticated networks to lone actors, with physical attacks against cyber networks, from foreign battlefields to our own communities, and our response must evolve accordingly. We should reflect on what terrorism is, as defined by the Terrorism Act 2000. It is a use or threat of action designed to influence a government or intimidate the public or a section of the public, where the use of threat action is designed to advance political, religious, racial or ideological causes. The full list of actions are detailed in the Terrorism Act, but includes serious violence against a person, actions that endanger life, health and safety, and or action that seriously damages property. Prescription is not a step that is taken lightly, but it is a strong and necessary tool that previous, as well as now the current government, have taken and should use to protect the public and to ensure that our police and security services have fuller access to the resources they need to keep the public and our institutions and our way of life safe. No one can hear the steps that the Minister set out in the actions of Palestine Action, MMR and RAM, and consider these to be the actions of peaceful, legitimate protest groups.
Will the Shadow Minister give way on that point?
Yes.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. Will she accept that there is a distinction in intent when you look at Palestine Action vis-à-vis the other two organisations? There is no intention with the Palestinian Authority to cause intentional injury to people. And for that, there is already criminal matters that can be dealt with at criminal courts.
I thank the member for that, but if you're using pyrotechnics against people who are escaping an attack by your organisation, that is an intent. If you're intending to damage RAF property and MOD property by sabotaging RAF jets at Brize Norton, that is intent. So they are also showing intent, as well as these other organisations are. Madam Deputy Speaker, these groups do not share our values. They do not respect our country, they do not care about our way of life, and they show no regard for the safety of our citizens. We on our ventures are proud that the actions have been taken by the previous Conservative governments to strengthen our counter-terrorism framework. We gave our police and security services the powers they need to confront the evolving threats, and we welcome and support the Home Secretary now making use of these same powers today. As the Minister said, prescription is a vital tool and a strong deterrent, but it is only part, yet a very important part, of what we need to do to keep our country safe. On its own, it is not enough. It must be followed with enforcement, and we will, of course, be watching closely to ensure that the police have the resources and backing they need from the Labour government to ensure that they can do just that. Madam Deputy Speaker, as both the Minister and I have said, the first job of any government is to keep their citizens safe, and we as the official opposition will always support the government in that aim. The activities of these organisations have clearly met a threshold for prescription under the Terrorism Act. So, to conclude, we on this side of the House are very happy to support the government in their aims today.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I want to speak specifically about Palestine Action. I think it's most regrettable that the government has brought one order banning 3 organisations when it knows that there is a political disagreement on this. This is no way to bring terror legislation. I want to be clear and to put on the record that I would be supporting this order today if it only referred to the organisations Maniacs, Murder Cult and the Russian Imperial Movement. Leading legal and human rights organisations, Amnesty International and Liberty, have condemned the potential prescription of Palestine Action. Liberty has said that targeting a protest group with terrorism powers is a shocking escalation of the government's crackdown on protest. This move would be a huge step change in how counter-terror laws are applied. Amnesty International UK has said that we're deeply concerned at the use of counter-terrorism powers to target protest groups. They certainly shouldn't be used to ban them. They have both urged the Home Secretary to rethink before bringing this to Parliament. Yesterday, several United Nations special rapporteurs, including those for protecting human rights while countering terrorism and for promoting freedom of expression, said they had contacted the UK government to say that acts of protest that damage property but are not intended to kill or injure people should not be treated as terrorism. Likewise, former Labour Justice Minister Lord Charlie Faulkner has stated that the sort of demonstration seen at military base by Palestine Action would not justify prescription as a terrorist organisation. Today, however, we are not voting on whether people agree with Palestine Action's tactics. We are not voting on whether people think their aim is right or wrong. We are voting on whether the actions they have taken against property, not against people, should lead to them being treated as terrorists, when what they have done can be prosecuted under criminal damage, and indeed there's a long history of protest activity, including acts of trespass, criminal damage, sabotage and more. Indeed, the Home Secretary's recent statements on this repeatedly refers to criminal damage, and the live court cases showing that there is already legal provision to deal with Palestine Action. There are a variety of potential consequences if this prescription against Palestine Action is passed today. Supporting or joining Palestine Action could carry up to 14 years in prison. It risks criminalising thousands of volunteers and supporters. Thousands have supported or volunteered with Palestine Action, including students, nurses, retirees and professionals. Many have never engaged in direct action, but risk being criminalised. Today I met with Amnesty International and they offered a number of frightening examples of how this could be used to place our constituents at risk of prosecution under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act and could face a maximum sentence of 14 years if Palestine Action are prescribed. Amnesty International's examples: a person who tweets, "I oppose the war crimes in Gaza and I do think Palestine Action have a point," could easily fall foul of this provision. A person who says to another person, "I don't support all the methods of Palestine Action, but I really do think protest is important and I respect the personal sacrifices Palestine Action are willing to make, risking arrest to challenge war crimes." An individual with a placard that reads "Palestine Action are peaceful, they should be de-prescribed." This could affect our constituents who have never been a member of Palestine Action, who have never committed direct action, who would never commit direct action, and speeches they make or comments they make in community meetings could be trawled, and these people could end up facing legal proceedings resulting in a prison sentence of up to 14 years. That concerns us all. People out there view terrorism as meaning heinous acts such as shooting people, blowing people up, assassinating people, and acts of violence. I would urge colleagues to consider the consequences to their constituents of prescribing Palestine Action alongside these other groups.
I call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm also very grateful to the Minister for his time discussing this issue with me. As has already been mentioned, there are 3 organisations listed today, and the order before us is unamendable. Taking each of the 3 organisations in turn, the Russian Imperial Movement is an ultranationalist and white supremacist militant organisation operating from inside Russia. The group has already been prescribed by both the United States and Canada, and even the Russian government itself has blacklisted many of the group's publications and activities. The rationale and justification for prescription is clear, and we are content to support it. The maniac murder cult is similarly destructive, driven by a belief that society must be violently destabilised so that a new neo-Nazi or white supremacist order can rise from its ashes. They promote random acts of violence, including murder, assaults and bombings, as a deliberate tactic to instill fear and chaos. The rationale and justification for prescription is clear and we are content to support it. But the questions for many today relate to Palestine Action. On the 20th of June, as has been widely reported in the press, 2 members of Palestine Action gained unauthorised access to RAF Brize Norton, the UK's largest airbase in Oxfordshire, circumventing perimeter security under cover of darkness. Once inside, they targeted 2 aircraft. Incidents involving members of Palestine Action also include attacks at sites operated by Elbit Systems in Bristol in 2024 and again this year, as well as at Thales UK facility in Glasgow in 2022. And I note the Minister's comments about cases currently going through the courts. No matter how strongly any of us feel about the appalling humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and many of us across this House and across this country feel very strongly indeed, this does not justify attacks on military bases in Britain. Those responsible must face the full force of the law. There is no doubt about that. But that's already the law, and that's not what is in front of MPs today. The question here is not about whether the people were committing crimes or not, but whether someone who even expresses support for them should face up to 14 years in jail. The bar for which groups should be prescribed as terrorist organisations is rightly set very high. Transparency around why these decisions are made is crucial for maintaining the public's trust in our counter-terrorism framework. So I've been listening carefully, both to experts raising their concerns, including from the UN, as mentioned previously by the Mother of the House, but also what the Minister has said and the Home Secretary's words about her reasons for making this decision based on damage to property, notwithstanding the Minister's comments about the use of violence. Prescribing an organisation solely on the grounds of serious damage to property would be, I believe, unprecedented. To date, and I'd welcome the Minister correcting me if I've got this wrong, no organisation has been prescribed in the UK exclusively for property damage, as was in the Home Secretary's words on the government website. While there may be compelling legal arguments that the actions of Palestine Action have met the legal definition of terrorism in terms of criminal damage, serious criminal damage, the decision to prescribe is ultimately up to the Home Secretary's discretion. There are still questions as to whether that discretion is proportionate in this case, given the level of threat posed to the general public, and I'd welcome more details from the Minister on why he believes this is a proportionate response, as I remain to be convinced. Currently, the maximum custodial term for certain offences relating to membership or expressing support for a prescribed terrorist organisation is 14 years. Yet, in instances such as this, where actions, though criminal and damaging, may not pose the same imminent threat to life, a blanket application of such severe penalties risks being disproportionate. The Home Secretary rightly has substantial powers to take action to keep our country safe, but it is also right and entirely proper that we scrutinise the use of these powers and press the government to ensure any use of them is wholly proportionate.
Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 21 years ago, a human rights barrister stood in court and defended an activist who broke into RAF Fairford trying to disable a bomber to prevent war crimes in Iraq. That case became a landmark in lawful, non-violent direct action against an illegal war. That barrister is now our Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, KC. He argued that it was not terrorism but conscience. Fast forward to 20th of June 2025. 2 Palestine Action activists enter RAF Brize Norton and sprayed red paint, not fire, on aircraft linked to surveillance flights over Gaza. Instead of prosecuting them for criminal damage, which is what normally is done, the Home Secretary is using the Terrorism Act to prescribe them as a terrorist group. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is an unprecedented and dangerous overreach of the state. Never before in Britain has it been a crime to simply support a group. This order lumps a non-violent network of students, nurses, teachers, firefighters and peace campaigners, ordinary people, my constituents and yours, with neo-Nazi militias and mass casualty cults. Palestine Action's real crime, we have to be clear, is shutting down Elbit system sites that arm the Israeli military. Its true offence has been audacious enough to expose the blood-soaked ties between this government and the genocidal Israeli apartheid state and its war machine. So let us be clear, to equate a spray can of paint with a suicide bomb isn't just absurd, it is grotesque. It is a deliberate distortion of the law to chill dissent, criminalise solidarity and suppress the truth. Amnesty International, Liberty, over 266 senior lawyers, UN special rapporteurs have all opposed these draconian measures. Even at this late stage, the order should be withdrawn. Under this order, anyone expressing moral support for a proscribed group could face 14 years in prison. That includes wearing a badge, wearing a t-shirt, sharing a post or calling for proscription, and journalists have no exemption too. There is no legal protection for reporting favourably, even factually, about Palestine Action, and by this weekend millions of people, including many of our constituents, could be placed under these sweeping restrictions. And let us not forget what is actually happening in Gaza, where the real crimes are being ignored. Hospitals bombed, children starved, tens of thousands of people killed. Palestinian children now suffer more amputations per capita than anywhere else on earth. Israel on trial for genocide at the ICJ. Israeli Prime Minister with an ICC arrest warrant, and the government's response to criminalise solidarity, to continue exporting lethal F-35 jets that are decimating Gaza. And we have to also understand the history of this country and what built our democracy, the tradition of civil disobedience, from the suffragettes without whom I wouldn't have the vote, let alone the privilege of being here as an MP. Even those who oppose Palestine Action's tactics must recognise the vast gulf between criminal damage and terrorism. If this order passes, what's next? Climate protesters, striking workers, feminists in the street? Already we've seen a wider crackdown on our civil liberties. Musicians censored, journalists arrested, demonstrating, including MPs sitting here harassed. And now this government wants to use anti-terror laws to make peaceful protest itself a crime. If our democratic institutions functioned as they should, none of this would be necessary. So to conclude, if this prescription passes, as it will, we have to understand that no campaign will be safe tomorrow. We also have to recognise that this will go down as a dark day in our country's history, and one that will be remembered. People will ask, which side were you on? And I stand with the millions of people that oppose genocide, because I am one of them. I oppose the blood-soaked hands of this government trying to silence us. So I say this loudly and proudly on Wednesday the 2nd of July, 2025, we are all Palestine.
Order!
No, we're not.
No, we're not.
Sir Ian Douglas-May.
Madam Deputy Speaker, whilst listening to this, and I, in a way, I do have concerns about the last of the three organisations, just generally about the application of the criminal law, and there may be another way, but I support the government's position on that, as it does. But then it cast into light, while I had listened to this, the organisation that sits there, that we have taken no action in terms of prescribing, is the IRGC. And in the debates about all the elements that are going on in here, this sits like the elephant in the room. Why are we not prescribing the IRGC? Why have we resisted doing that? Now, that would have a huge impact on terrorism or aspects of terrorism at all. I mean, if you look at it very carefully, they export deliberately the Islamic Revolution. They use proxies. Right. They've been sponsoring terrorism, as demonstrated without dispute all over the world. They support Hamas and Hezbollah and have been hugely supplying them with weapons, and whether on which side of the argument or whatever one lies, the fact is there wouldn't have been this issue and this terrible killing going on there had that not been the case at the time. So they're very heavily involved in that. They're sanctioned, but they're not prescribed, and sanctioning doesn't give you enough powers to deal with their proxies and those that work for them. And it is in fact the present government that in opposition campaigned to prescribe them. I remember quite happily working with various members of the opposition front bench at the time to ensure that they were prescribed. And they say, and the Foreign Office says this endlessly, that, oh, well, we'd lose all the possibility to make diplomatic relations and to get through to Iran. Well, you know, how's that going? How's that gone over the last year? It's not at all. You can't really reason with these characters. And it's interesting because the global terrorist attacks have a huge number of them rooted in IRGC money and training higher levels of activity in the UK, and it's the propaganda in the UK trying to build arrangements within the UK in plain view at times, even on links like Face and Time and all the rest of it, where they can actually be tracked, but they do it openly because nothing can be done to them at all. And of course they support Hezbollah, who's also proscribed. So you keep running this chain around and around, you come back to the IRGC. I would think that today should be the debate, that should be the decision, that should be here on the floor of the House. The IRGC should be proscribed because they are at the root of all terrorism that exists here and in the Middle East. And I think if we don't do that, then it begs the question, what are we doing here with the other three organisations?
Clive Lewis.
Caught me off guard there. Can I firstly associate myself with the comments of the front bench for Lib Dems? I thought they made some very, very good comments, and I'd like to associate myself with them. Secondly, I agree with the prescription of the two far-right fascist organisations, and I think they should be prescribed. But can we as a House accept that there are those of us here today who have a different take on today's prescription for Palestine Action? We don't have to agree with the behaviour or actions of Palestine Action to make the case here today that this prescription is wrong. I'd also like to ask the honourable members to acknowledge the fact that many of us here today who take a different view on this issue are a part of this democracy just as much of those who agree with the prescription. It's just that our take on the delicacy of our democracy and what this prescription does and how it undermines our democracy, in our opinion, happen to differ from other people. I know members on the opposite benches have repeatedly said that when it comes to ULEZ cameras and low emission zone cameras, they've actually said that they understand and empathise with those constituents who have smashed and vandalised them. So direct action is something it's not just of the left, it's something that everyone in our democracy can partake in. So this is a judgment call on how we best protect our democracy, and an acknowledgement that not all threats are external or violent. Some threats are based on the decisions that we here ourselves take in this place. Sometimes we may take decisions which fundamentally undermine our own democracy. Now, I have no doubt that some of us will be called terrorist sympathisers by some who disagree with our position, but that would be wrong. When you look around the world and watch as democracy and the rule of law is being systematically smashed, corporations, the wealthy, have increasing power and wealth to influence our democracy. Look over at the Atlantic, at the United States. Our democracies are delicate. Our democracies are precious. And the decisions that we take here determine whether those democracies will survive as we go into the future. I look around the world. I look around this country. I look at the party, the authoritarian right party, that is 10 points ahead in the polls. And I worry about the future of our democracy. That means that this government, our government, has to make decisions that take that into account. That take into account that we may not be in government one day. It may be the authoritarian right, and they will take this further and faster and deeper than we ever have. So we should be putting in fire guards now, protecting our democracy. This doesn't do that. And I will conclude by saying, Madam Deputy Speaker, I understand what terrorism is. I was in London on the 7th of July in 2007, and I watched my community, this city, attacked by real terrorists. And at that point, rightly or wrongly, I decided I was going to Afghanistan to fight the terrorists. And I went because I love this country and I love our democracy and I want to see it protected. I think today's prescription order against Palestine Action undermines that. And I wish my government wouldn't do it. Thank you very much.
Pete Wishart.
Deputy Speaker, as we've heard, the issues around the prescription of Palestine Action has thrown up a number of legitimate concerns, and there's no doubt it will have an impact on our right to protest or on civil liberties that we have enjoyed for decades. And where it's absolutely and utterly right to condemn and prosecute criminal activity, especially those that threaten our national security, surely this must be done within the framework of existing legislation as it always has been. And this order looks nothing other than a direct response to Palestine Action being able to infiltrate an RAF base and causing damage to a defence aircraft. The decision to prescribe an organisation is ultimately a matter for the government, and it's up to the Home Secretary to decide who goes on that list. It's based on intelligence that the government holds. But I don't think the Minister has convinced many of us today that this has met the thresholds for this prescription, and we need to hear more about their concerns about this particular group. But before reaching for that power, the government must take into account whether it is proportionate, justified and in the national interest to prescribe such an organisation. Terrorism legislation, as we know, hands extremely broad powers to the state, and as such it must always be treated with the highest degree of caution and restraint. Now, we live in a society where groups and organisations have the democratic right to campaign and express their views on particular issues in a democratic, respectful and lawful manner. It is important that the right to lawful protest is not affected by the Home Secretary's decision today, and it's extremely concerning that this decision could lead to these powers being extended to other campaigning organisations. And it's inexplicable that Palestine Action has been linked to groups such as the Maniacs murder cult and the Russian imperial movement, groups unknown to this House until this order was on the order paper today, but groups that, with a cursory glance at their activities, could of course be prescribed. For Palestine Action to be included alongside these groups is at best a cynical and calculated move by the government in order to ensure that this order gets through today. People all over the UK, including many of my constituents, rightly feel very strongly about the appalling crimes being committed against innocent civilians in Gaza on a daily basis. Many of these people have been taking part in weekly protests to make their voices heard, to show solidarity with the Palestinian people. These people are now concerned that they might be caught up in this prescription. And I'm also concerned that many young people who are sharing social media posts from Palestine Actions could now be considered as glorifying what will soon be a prescribed group. We need clarity on what actions would result in people being charged under this terrorism legislation. For example, does wearing a Palestine Action badge handed out at a demonstration or a rally mean that they could be charged with terrorism? Organisations, as we've heard, like Amnesty International and even the United Nations have expressed their concern about this prescription regarding the UK's broad definition of terrorism. This week, Madam Deputy Speaker, an Israeli strike in Gaza seafront cafe killed at least 20 Palestinians. This is what we should be discussing today and every day until a permanent ceasefire is reached and all the hostages are released. The government must act in the national interest. That is what they've got to do. And they've got to keep us safe from all of these different challenges that's presented to them. But we need clear reassurance about the wider impact of what is being proposed today.
John Pearce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Home Secretary's decisive action on Palestine Action, Maniacs Murder Cult and the Russian imperial movement today. 20 months on from the horrific terror attacks of the 7th of October, the suffering of innocent people in Gaza, in Israel and beyond has rightly been the subject of much international campaigning. Money has been raised to support charities getting aid into Gaza. The Hostages and Missing Families Forum has worked tirelessly to keep the plight of the 50 remaining hostages on the world's agenda, and hundreds of thousands of people have contacted their MPs, signed petitions and made their voices heard. This is all genuine activism, importantly within the bounds of the law. Palestine Action is something different. Over 5 years, it has conducted a campaign of violence, intimidation and criminal damage. In one attack on a business in Bristol, 2 police officers were attacked with a sledgehammer. The officers also then found not only sledgehammers, but whips, axes and other homemade weapons. Palestine Action have attacked a business in my constituency in High Peak, intimidating the workers there. Last month at RAF Bryce Norton, military planes were vandalised and £30 million of damage done. Such attacks undermine our national security, our armed forces, and can never be justified. I applaud the Home Secretary for responding in the strongest possible terms. But Palestine Action also has a track record of attacks against this country's Jewish community. In May this year, a building housing Jewish-owned businesses in North Manchester was vandalised with red paint and graffiti reading Happy Nakba Day. Later that month, a Jewish-owned business in Stamford Hill was attacked by the organisation with windows broken, red paint graffiti and damage done to the building's mezuzah. In the latter case, Palestine Action's claims that the business was linked to the Israel Defence Companies proved baseless. This campaign of anti-Semitic harassment reveals the logical conclusion of their extremism. And the important difference between all of the other groups that has been mentioned in this House is that this group targets a specific group within our country of a specific ethnic and religious minority. This extremism does not help with single Palestinian. Smashing windows will not free Palestine. It undermines the hard work of so many people who support the Palestinian cause and towards a peaceful future. And it leads to an environment where British Jews feel unsafe and harassed, something that should never be tolerated. Legitimate protest is a fundamental democratic freedom, but Palestinian Action abandoned that legitimate action a long time ago. I welcome the government's swift action today in ensuring that this organisation can no longer pose a threat to our security, to our businesses and to the Jewish community.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the debate opened today, I intervened on the Minister and I'm grateful to him for giving way. I just need an explanation, and I hope we'll get one, as to why groups are always put together in these orders and not dealt with separately and individually, because clearly there are different orders of concern here. And I want solely to speak about the issue surrounding Palestine Action. We live in a democratic society and we have to also understand where our rights have come from. The member who's just spoken from High Peak represents the place where, in 1932, the mass trespass took place, led by Benny Rothman, a Jewish activist in the Communist Party at that time, who was demanding rights of access to the countryside. He was roundly condemned by all of the mass media and the government of the day. He was put on trial, he was put in prison, and he was eventually released from prison after mass protests in his support. Without Benny Rothman and those others, that access to the countryside simply would not have happened at that time. And you look at all the other people that over decades of our history have stood up for free speech and for democracy, going back to the Chartists, going back to the suffragettes, those that campaigned to end apartheid in South Africa. And interestingly, during all of the anti-apartheid years, the British government, whilst it did condemn the ANC and did indeed believe for a while that Nelson Mandela was a terrorist, never banned the ANC in Britain, because the advice they got was it was important that there be a place that people could express that voice of hope of the end of apartheid. The women that went to Greenham Common to protest about the deployment of nuclear weapons there were also never labelled as terrorists. Yes, they were charged under criminal trespass, as indeed many, many others have been, and indeed those that undertake direct action are very well aware of the risks they take. But it crosses an enormous threshold to suddenly announce that Palestine Action, speaking out against the horrors of what is happening in Gaza, where hundreds are mown down every day by the Israeli Defence Force simply for queuing for food when they're desperately hungry and their children are starving. Surely we should be looking at the issue that Palestine Action are concerned about, and the supply of weapons from this country to Israel, which has made all this possible. If this order goes through today, it will have a chilling effect on protests. And I quote a letter that was sent to the Home Secretary on the 28th of June. Direct action is a long-standing and respected part of British political history, from the suffragettes chaining themselves to railings, to striking miners, to anti-apartheid campaigners, occupying institutions and disrupting trade, civil disobedience and direct action that have always been a necessary Forces for Progress and Justice. And that letter comes from, I won't give away now, that letter comes from Bibi Khan, the chair of North London Council of Mosques, and Mohammed Ad-Din from the Newer Muslim Forum on behalf of the London Councils of Mosques, who are concerned about the chilling effect that this piece of legislation, if agreed today, will have on the rights to protest as a whole. The last point I'd make, and I hope the Minister, if he gets a chance, will be able to reply on this, legal action is being taken. There is a case coming up in the High Court this Friday, a judicial review of this case. Can we have it be clear this will not be put into force until all legal avenues have been exhausted, and there won't be some temporary imposition of this later to be withdrawn if there is successful legal action? I think we need to know that all democratic avenues have been fully explored in this process.
Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today's push to prescribe Palestine Action, a non-violent direct action group as a terrorist organisation, is a disastrous turning point of historic proportions. It risks undermining existing prosecution cases against activities by Palestine Action and activists, and is legally dubious. Human and civil rights organisations, lawyers and UN experts have all spoken out against the misuse of terrorism laws, calling this move unjustified and a warning of a chilling effect on a protest and advocacy generally, especially in relation to the defence of human rights and international law in Palestine. We have already seen the chilling effect on protest. Palestine Solidarity Campaign have been prevented from protesting outside Parliament this evening, and police have placed restrictions on the demo and pushed it further down Whitehall. For hundreds of years, protests outside Parliament have gone ahead. Limiting dissent in this way should concern us all, and we've seen that in the last couple of weeks in terms of the Assistant Dying Bill, abortion and the anti-welfare cut. The question members of this House must ask ourselves today is whether non-violent political groups should ever be designated as a terror threat. If Palestine Action is prescribed this week by the weekend, no, not giving way, anyway, wearing Brandon T-shirts, a bag could face terrorism charge. Amnesty International have flagged that Palestine Action is prescribed this week. Even meeting with their lawyers to discuss intervening in judicial review proceedings could see them fall foul of counter-terrorism legislation. These are all examples of potential grounds for prosecution under counter-terrorism laws if Palestine Action is prescribed, which could come from constituents who are not members of the organisation and never engaged in direct action. The scope, what we're talking about, is insanely broad. Is the government really going to demand that we vote to criminalise our constituents in this way? Prescribing Palestine Action today would set a dangerous precedent for the future government misuse of counter-terror laws. It would be the first group prescribed mainly for serious damage to property and the first prescribed direct action group. Prescription is neither necessary nor proportionate. We already have sufficient criminal legislation that always dealt with where necessary, and the Home Secretary has provided no impact assessment and, quote, no or no significant impact on the private, voluntary or public sectors foreseen. But we have received no reassurances around how the proportionality test has been applied or whether unintended impacts on the wider pro-Palestine movement were considered by the Home Office and Prescription Review Group. Indeed, we have heard from civil rights groups that there have been allegedly meetings with representatives from the Israeli government and arms companies such as Elbit, but none with human rights groups. Whether members of this House debating and voting on this SI today agree with the methods of the arms of Palestine Action, we should all be able to agree that lumping Palestine Action together with the other two obscure groups to ensure that it is prescribed is a disgraceful manipulation of parliamentary procedure. Search and Hansard, neither of the two groups have been mentioned. They are so obscure. This manoeuvre is nakedly transparent and shows that the government knows just how shaky prescription is. Today, they come for Palestine Action. If this passes today, who and what will be next? And I look forward to the Minister answering our concerns raised in this debate today, particularly regarding grouping those three organisations together. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Ellie Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let me start by putting on record that I know at least two people who have previously participated in Palestine Action protests.
But that's not why I am speaking today. This is about fundamental principles. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a chilling moment for British democracy. Let's be clear about what is happening here. A political protest group is being silenced. And isn't it hugely ironic that this is being done today, when this morning hundreds of women MPs, including the Home Secretary herself, celebrated in Westminster Hall the 97th anniversary of equal votes for women, a victory won by the suffragettes, themselves a direct action protest group. I have three key points I would like to make today. First, it's a clear overreach to conflate direct action with terrorism. Second, this will have a chilling effect on the democratic rights to free speech and protest. And third, it is utterly cynical of the government to wrap up proscription of Palestine Action with proscription of two other clearly terrorist groups. The Terrorism Act 2000 makes it clear that strict proportionality and necessity tests must be met before prescribing any group. But this decision on Palestine Action is not necessary or proportionate. As Amnesty International and others have made clear, there is ample criminal law capable of responding to a direct action protest network like Palestine Action. They may have engaged in criminal damage, their supporters may break into air bases, they may have been charged with offences like violent disorder and aggravated burglary. They may have carried out actions that I absolutely do not condone. Indeed, I condemn physical attacks against properties in Stamford Hill that understandably may have stirred up genuine fear. And personally, I find the words spoken by one of their co-founders at a rally in the aftermath of the October 7th Hamas attacks absolutely horrific, but that does not make Palestine Action terrorist. That bar is and should be extremely high. It is commonly understood internationally to involve the use or threat against violence against civilians to instill fear, whereas the stated aim of Palestine Action is to prevent war crimes, to prevent crime against humanity, to prevent genocide. And it's not just the members and supporters of Palestine Action who are being silenced. By association, this proscription represents a grave risk to the free speech and protest rights of millions of members of the public who are rightly concerned that a genocide is happening in Gaza on this government's watch. Millions of people in this country are active, whether online or in their communities, in campaigning to end the UK's complicity in that genocide. And there's a clear risk that proscribing Palestine Action could criminalise people, for example, for sharing a social media post with potential imprisonment of up to 14 years. This interferes with the fundamental rights of members of the public to protest the government's policies and is clearly disproportionate when compared with the actions of the group. I am also deeply concerned by the Home Office's utterly cynical decision to wrap up the proscription of Palestine Action with two other groups who undeniably do meet the terrorism test. This has clearly been done in order to make it extremely difficult for MPs to vote against the motion. I want it on record. I and my Green Party colleagues absolutely oppose the proscription of Palestine Action, and we will oppose any similar attacks on the civil disobedience which is such a proud part of UK history. And if you compare the charges against Palestine Action with those of maniacs, murder cult and the Russian imperial movement, paramilitary training camps, guides on how to fatally attack somebody, supremacist neo-Nazis organising in support for Satanism, those are clearly terrorist acts, whereas prescribing Palestine Action appears to be a purely political move, unworthy of a democracy supposedly committed to human rights. No wonder there is significant opposition to this move across Parliament, including from a former Lord Chancellor and Justice Secretary, Lord Falconer. And it is a massive distraction from the continuing horrors in Gaza. That's what Palestine Action want to bring to an end, as do many in this room.
Order. Nadia Whitome.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to start by making clear to members that the order we're voting on is not about whether or not we are supportive of Palestine Action's political positions or protest methods. To vote against this motion, you do not have to agree with them at all, and you can still support holding them criminally liable for their actions, because the question is about whether they should be prescribed as a terrorist group, placed alongside the likes of Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, and National Action. It's fitting, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this debate is taking place on the 97th anniversary of women winning the vote on equal terms with men, thanks in no small part to the suffragettes. The suffragettes carried out direct action far more extreme than anything those in Palestine Action have done, yet today their role in changing history for the better is commemorated. Whatever you think of their actions, Palestine Action are part of a similar tradition, with the target this time being to stop the genocide in Gaza. It is unprecedented for a government to ban a civil disobedience protest group in the way that it is attempting to do so today. But what's not unprecedented is protesters breaking into military bases. This has never before resulted in prescription. Prescribing Palestine Action would be a draconian overreach. It would threaten the fundamental right to peaceful protest. It would set a dangerous precedent that could be used in future to further silence dissent, while diminishing what the Terrorism Act is meant to prevent. UN... Yes, I will.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. As the MP for Newbury, we have Greenham Common, which now is very peaceful, but before had cruise missiles. And Greenham Common peace women actually broke into the base. They attacked jets with hammers, and they were prosecuted under criminal law. They were held to account, but I believe, do you agree with me that potentially under this government, even Greenham peace women would have been considered a terrorist organisation?
I thank him for his intervention, and I agree entirely. Madam Deputy Speaker, UN experts are urging us not to do this. They state they are concerned at the unjustified labelling of a political protest movement as terrorist. Hundreds of lawyers have written to the Home Secretary warning that prescribing Palestine Action would conflate protest and terrorism. Amnesty International and Liberty have both expressed deep concerns. We've seen a senior civil servant briefing disquiet among Home Office staff about this decision, calling it absurd. It's important to remember that this prescription would not just affect members of Palestine Action, but anyone who supports them. Donating to a fundraiser or posting positively about the group on social media would mean committing a crime. We risk criminalising huge numbers of our own constituents. I regret that we're being denied the opportunity to vote separately on the prescription of Palestine Action and the other two organisations, which are neo-Nazi organisations, and whose prescription I would wholeheartedly support. But grouping together these organisations that so clearly do not belong in the same category demonstrates again why we cannot allow this prescription to go ahead. I therefore have no choice but to vote against it today.
Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I must say I never thought the day would arise when I, as a non-lawyer, would be advising a government of lawyers that they need to be really sure of the legal basis for what they're doing. As I said in an intervention on this subject on the 23rd of June, it would do the country and the government no favours if they were to lose in court a challenge to the process of prescription. Because whereas the secret sabotage of planes would certainly have been an act of terrorism leading to prescription, the fact is that this was a performative act that these people announced they had done. So the question I want to put to the government is, are they going to at least adopt a belt and braces policy when it comes to the prosecution of the people who did that terribly irresponsible and wrong-headed act of sabotaging those planes? Will they prosecute them as well on the basis that they have done criminal damage, that they have done something which is to attack the forces of the Crown and which therefore borders on sedition? Because otherwise, I fear that by using the wrong aspects of the law to pursue some people who did some very bad things indeed, the government will end up actually scoring an own goal when these people walk free with a court triumph under their belt. I am not convinced that the policy that the government has adopted on this matter, though justified in terms of the unacceptable behaviour of the perpetrators, is nevertheless going to stand up in court when there are plenty of other legal methods that could be used to deal with this form of extremism. And extremism it is, but it does not, in my opinion, pass the threshold to be classified in the legal sense as terrorism. Now, it may be the case that if I'd been able to accept the offer of the Minister, which I understand he made to have a word with me on Privy Council terms before this debate, and I thank him for that offer, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to take it up, it may be that he would have been able to tell me things about this group that would have then convinced me that
it crossed that threshold. But if he's not able to tell these things in public, and there may be very good reasons why he isn't, then I suspect he won't be able to tell it to the courts either. So I say to the government, nobody, I think, will accuse me of being soft on anti-militarist extremist groups, but I say to the government with the best will in the world, make sure you adopt a legal belt and braces policy when it comes to prosecuting this group, and don't rely just on this prescription, because I fear I see trouble ahead from my learned friends.
Imran Hussain.
Madam Deputy Speaker, let me also place on record my full support for the prescription of maniacs, murder cult and the Russian imperial movement. These are vile, murderous, fascist cults. Their place on the prescribed list is justified and necessary. But it's precisely because we must take terrorism seriously that we must also draw clear lines. To put Palestine Action, a direct action protest group, in the same category as these murderous extremist organisations erodes the credibility of our legal framework and risks undermining civil rights. Prescription must be used judicially. Conflating protest with terror is a dangerous step that undermines the very freedoms our counter-terrorism laws are meant to protect. Now, where there is criminal activity, there is adequate legal provision within the criminal law to deal with that. What we are being asked to do is prescribe them under the Terrorism Act to treat civil dissent, whether or not we agree or disagree with that civil dissent, as extremism. That is a concerning shift, and we risk crossing a line. Hundreds of lawyers, including KCs and human rights advocates, have warned that this is not a hallmark of democracy. We've heard earlier today that United Nations special rapporteurs have expressed serious concern about this measure. What we haven't heard, actually, is the huge implication that this will have on some of our communities. The risk of being criminalised simply for showing support for Palestine. Under this prescription, people could face prosecution for something as simple as wearing a badge, sharing a post online, or attending a peaceful protest. Now, do we really, the question for this House is, do we really want to become a society where non-violently expressing solidarity or even speaking out could be interpreted as terrorism? This will only further fuel fear and repression. Local anti-racist groups could suddenly find themselves under suspicion. Communities, whole communities, could be cast as suspect, not for what they do, but for what they stand for. And there's numerous examples. I don't have the time today. My honourable friend, the member for Leeds East, as always, eloquently set out a number of examples that should send shivers, frankly, down the backs of everybody's spine in this place. This is not the way forward. A non-violent protest, what our democracy is meant to protect, now risks being labelled as terror. The legal basis for this prescription is unsound. The democratic consequences are severe, and the moral cost is frankly unacceptable. Let me be clear, it will disproportionately target campaigners and minority communities, and it will set a precedent that reaches far beyond this one group. Today, it's Palestine Action. Tomorrow, it could be climate activists. We are standing on a slippery slope. Prescribing a protest group is not strength. Madam Deputy Speaker, I urge this House to defend our hard-won rights to civil liberties, because to conflate protests with terrorism is not democracy, and therefore I will not support, and I want to put that on the record, any prescription of Palestine Action.
Well said.
I can squeeze in one more speaker if they're tight. Shaukat Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I came to this country as a child. This country nurtured me, educated me and embraced me, and I love this country for so many reasons. But there are two reasons I love this country for more than anything else, I suspect. One is its sense of fairness, and the second is its sense of ability to be free, to be able to express how you feel. democratically. That is why today I speak specifically about Palestine Action when I say that if we proscribe this organisation under the Terrorism Act, we will, for the first time in this nation's history, outlaw a domestic protest group as a terrorist organisation. Britain has a proud, though often hard-fought tradition of civil resistance. We remember the reverence of the suffragettes who are branded as criminals for smashing windows but are now celebrated as heroes of justice. We remember the civil rights movement where protests occupied streets and broke unjust laws to dismantle segregation. And we remember the global campaign against apartheid, ministers in this house where people of conscience defied authorities, trespassed and disrupted in the name of ending a brutal system. The very freedom we hold dear today, votes for women, racial equality and the end of apartheid, were not born out from men and women in suits in this establishment, but by people out there. And it is that tradition we are about to disrupt today. This decision, rushed through Parliament in a matter of days, bundled with unrelated foreign neo-Nazi groups and debated for mere minutes, is a reckless abuse of process. It denies Parliament the gravity of deliberation this issue so badly demands. The prescription has already been condemned by a vast range of people, from Sally Rooney to Lord Faulkner, and this is going to continue. Because what is even worse, this statutory instrument risks criminalising anyone who supports, sympathises with, or even publicly praises Palestine Action's aims. It opens the door to the prosecution of journalists, filmmakers, campaigners and politicians for doing nothing more than expressing solidarity. This is Orwellian dystopia on steroids. Let us also ask ourselves honestly, if we set this precedent today, who will be next? History will judge us harshly on those who choose silence in moments of moral testing. I urge my colleagues, do not allow this dangerous step to go unchallenged. Do not allow a Home Secretary, in a moment of political expediency, to permanently expand the reach of its anti-terror laws into the heart of a domestic protest. And do not let this House be the one that shrank the boundaries of freedom of expression. We owe it to those who fought so hard for our freedoms, who dared to dissent, who refused to be silent, and let us summon their courages now. Vote against this proscription, protect our democratic tradition, protect our right to protest.
I now come to the Minister, Minister Dan Jarvis.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to all of those who contributed to this debate. The prescription of these three organisations affirms the UK's zero-tolerance approach to terrorism. To be clear, these prescriptions would not affect anyone's legitimate and lawful right to protest, whether that's about Palestine, Gaza or anything else. The government has to take action when Palestine Action has orchestrated a nationwide campaign of property damage featuring attacks that have resulted in serious damage, attacks that have resulted in serious damage to property and crossed the legal threshold. I'm not going to give way.
Will the Minister give way? I think it's clear the Minister at this point is not wishing to give way. He does have until 5:27, so let's see how this progresses. Minister.
These are attacks that have resulted in serious damage to property and have crossed the legal threshold from direct criminal action into terrorism. They've used violence against people responding at the scenes of attacks. Members have been charged with a series of serious offences, including violent disorder, grievous bodily harm with intent and aggravated burglary, which is an offence involving a weapon. So this order would degrade their harmful activity. It will also reduce the threat, particularly to vulnerable individuals, from MMC's violent content, and it will reinforce our support for Ukraine and commitment to countering extreme right-wing terrorism in Europe. Madam Deputy Speaker.
Mr. McDonald, this is a very... I'm on my feet. This is a very tight debate that has to conclude at 5:20. The Minister has time. He may wish to take your intervention shortly. Is your point of order really relevant right now?
Let me explain. I want to know if this order goes through and I go out there to the demonstration that's mobilising at the moment to say I'm opposed to this, will I be prosecuted?
Not a point of order. The Minister may wish to respond. He has a few minutes to do so, but that's not a point of order. Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm happy to respond directly to the Right Honourable Gentleman's point of order. The process involving prescription action requires this House to agree it. Should it do so later this evening, it then goes to the other place and it will be for them to agree it or not. It will then be for the Home Secretary or for myself to sign an order, and the order would then become law at midnight on the night that it had been signed. I'm not going to give way to the Right Honourable Gentleman. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful for the House.
Minister, continue.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't think the Right Honourable Gentleman listened to what I said. I just explained to him the process that is in place. I am grateful to all of those who've considered this matter. It is a necessary and proportionate step to protect the public and defend our values. That is, after all, the first duty of the state, and under this government, nothing will matter more. And with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend this order to the House.
The question is, this is not a time for a point of order. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, tread along me. Are we ready? The question is, as on the order paper, as many that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Jen Kitchen and Christian Wakeford, and the tellers for the noes are Bell Rivera Addy and Ayub Khan. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 385. The noes to the left, 26.
The ayes to the right were 385. The noes to the left, 26. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Point of order, Carla Denyer.
As Madam Deputy Speaker knows, every single person who just voted no wanted to vote yes to the prescription of the maniacs, murder cult and the Russian imperial movement, but were prevented from doing so by the cynical way that the government lumped together these two clearly terrorist organisations with Palestine Action, which we could not support. Can the Speaker please advise me and those other MPs who just voted no if there is any way in future that prescription orders for unrelated organisations can be voted on separately so that each MP can apply their own critical assessment of whether each group has met the tests of proportionality and necessity required for a terrorist prescription.
Well said. Thank the honourable lady for having given notice of her point of order. The Chair does not have the power to separate out decisions on the contents of a statutory instrument. In making her point of order, she has put her points and her concerns on the record. Point of order, Zara Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. During the previous debate on the prescription of Palestine Action, the member for High Peak, who I have notified, spoke without declaring that he is chair of Labour Friends of Israel and has accepted hospitality and overseas trips funded by pro-Israel lobby organisations. The House was discussing a non-violent direct action group that directly challenges the Israeli state, which is on trial for genocide against the Palestinian people. Can you advise me, Madam Deputy Speaker, on what mechanisms are available so the British public are truly aware of what interests are being represented on this floor?
I thank the honourable lady for her point of order and indeed for having given advance notice of it. The procedure for raising a complaint of this sort is by writing to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, and it is not a matter for the Chair. Motion number 5 on agriculture. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 6 on subsidy control. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Speaking long before I was born, G.K. Chesterton said, big business is now an organised army. It is, some would say, militarism, but without military virtues. Heaven knows what he would say if he was alive now, as global corporations have such influence on all our lives. Yet it's the small and medium-sized businesses in my Lincolnshire constituency and in constituencies across this country that make up the backbone of our economy. But they also provide the particularities that colour and shape the places that each of us call home. It's those small and medium-sized businesses that reinvest in the communities of which they are part, which provide opportunities for local people. We all know them from our daily experience as customers of businesses, but we all know them too through the representations they make to us as members of Parliament. And today I speak in the interest of those small businesses, those entrepreneurs, those people who devote so much of their time and skill and energy for the common good, for the national interest and the common good, drive all that I do in this place. Indeed, small and medium-sized businesses employing up to 250 people make up about 99% of the businesses. But just think of the influence, of the effect of the other 1%. When SMEs are accused of wrongdoing, breaking the law even, they often have little in the way of resources to defend themselves and sit at the mercy of powerful regulators as well as the caprice of giant competitors. In contrast, the big multinational companies, which have come to dominate too much of our economy, have armies of compliance officers, lawyers, spin doctors to bat away legitimate concerns. The fear that we have, or that many of us in this chamber do, of two-tier justice is paralleled by a certainty about a two-tier economy. Faceless, heartless multinational firms often have little in the way of roots here, with many tech firms using such rootlessness to justify decisions to pay little, if any, tax. Corporate behemoths have grown ever larger, ever more dominant in their sectors, ever more detached from their customers, and ever more determined to bend rules and evade justice. We've seen profiteering, for example, of major supermarkets in recent years, who give their suppliers, primary producers, like the farmers and growers in my constituency, very often a raw deal. We've seen them distort the food chain and yet take advantage of the disruption brought by the pandemic and the war in the Ukraine. Indeed, the pandemic exacerbated the power of greedy globalists. Unite, the trade union, has highlighted the following research of 17,000 big firms, average profit margins have soared by 30% compared with the pre-pandemic period. In 2022, the profits of the 350 largest companies in Britain increased by around 89% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Contrast that, if you will, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the plight of smaller businesses, with ever greater costs and ever more unfair competition from their giant competitors. But if the claims of the globalists, do you remember them? The sort of people who addicted to modernity and to change, if the claims of those enthusiastic globalists that the world will be a better place for their activities were true, who has really benefited? In an economy where standards of living are falling, where productivity has stalled, and where the state grows ever bigger in the face of rising worklessness, the only beneficiaries of globalisation, it seems to me, have been a few people at the top of those corporate businesses. It's not monopolies that we need, it's a multiplicity of businesses. Start-up firms, local firms, firms that innovate, that engage in new activities in the economy rather than cement existing practices. Let's give those kind of businesses what they need. They need greater freedom, whilst the big corporate monoliths need to be regulated so they don't exploit the marketplace which they dominate. Think for a moment of the banks. Now, I have a vision of banking. I hope you might too, Madam Deputy Speaker, rooted in a sort of dad's army approach. You know, a Captain Mannering figure, committed to his community, in close touch with his customers, caring about the business which he ran. And that wasn't so. That wasn't just. That wasn't just a fiction in my younger years. I well remember going to a bank as a young man and asking if I could borrow £500 to buy an old car. I was a student at the time. The manager, a bit like Captain Mannering in character, invited me in, gave me a glass of sherry, and interrogated me for half an hour, and eventually said, yes, I think we can probably lend you the £500. Imagine that scene now. At best, you'd have an online connection with someone remotely situated. Possibly
you get a car for 500 quid there, John.
I think the Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green was referring to the £500 that he still owes me from the days when I used to work for him. But the point is that nowadays the connection between customers and suppliers has become at best detached and at worst remote. Now you'd have some, as I say, conversation with some remotely situated person who had known nothing about you or your circumstances and probably care.
Give away.
And probably care less.
Give away?
I will happily give way. Is it about the £500?
Yeah. without interest. Can I just say to my honourable friend, I agree with him, and I also agree something else, which is people don't realise that the really big multinationals, these global businesses, like, for example, Amazon, they don't really make their profits on what they sell you. What they do is they hold your data, and that's what they really sell subsequently, where they make their money and their profit. Your data derives you no income at all, and they make a lot of money on the back of that. And so trying to break that process down and to make things more local, you have to start at what we've been all complicit with, is the idea of getting something for nothing. It's not for nothing, it costs.
Well, my right-honourable friend, as ever, makes an apposite comment, because the trading of data by big businesses has become a business in itself in the way that he's set out. We need, in contrast, firms to practice responsibility, not to parrot slogans and virtue signal. They concentrate power and wealth with little regard for the community in which they sit or even the country in which they're situated. I give way to my old friend.
Can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for South Holland and the Deepings? Right honourable member is a friend of us all in this chamber. We all love him because of the wisdom he brings to this chamber. The right honourable member is a good friend of Northern Ireland as well, and I say this because he will be very pleased when he hears about what we're doing in Northern Ireland, the better regulation strategy, which requires departments to undertake and publish a regulatory impact assessment when considering new policy proposals or amendments to existing policy which may impact on businesses, and carry out a micro business test to assess the impact on businesses of fewer than 5 employees. But does the right honourable member, understanding what we're doing in Northern Ireland, not agree that with increased regulation must come increased cooperation to secure better business which benefits us all? The very thing that the right honourable gentleman is trying to achieve.
Well, again, as ever, the honourable gentleman makes an apposite and worthy contribution to our considerations. And I simply say this to the Minister. Government has a lot of power in all kinds of ways. It certainly has the power to regulate the kind of unfair practices that I've begun to set out, but it also has a power as a customer. And government procurement has never, under successive governments, been used as well as it might be to support British businesses, and particularly British small businesses. My challenge to the Minister is, let's look at that again. Let's look at how government, as a huge customer of all kinds of businesses, can support small and medium-sized firms. Decades of non-intervention, driven by the mistaken belief in the triumph of liberal economics, resulted in extraordinary numbers of foreign takeovers of British firms. It's also a matter of who owns these corporate giants, and overseas companies owning our critical national infrastructure. Now, the government recently approved the Vodafone 3 merger. 3 is owned by a Hong Kong-based conglomerate. I wonder how closely the Competitions and Markets Authority looked into the owners and leadership of 3's parent company, the CK Group. I wonder if that group, and perhaps the Minister can inform us tonight, has ties with the Chinese state. This merger mustn't become yet another corporate bonanza for shareholders at the expense of our national interest and the common good. Mr. Speaker, I sought this debate in particular following a meeting with a constituent of mine who was previous a Vodafone franchisee, along with others from across the country who I met. And I want to say to you, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am mindful of a legal case in which those franchisees of Vodafone are involved, and I have taken advice and amended my speech heavily as a result of that advice from the Table Office. but I do think it's important to set some of the context in the broad terms that I've described that relates to the behaviour of large companies that adopt the franchise model. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the honourable member for giving way and I congratulate him on securing this debate. Madam Deputy Speaker, can I refer to my register of interest, in particular trade union membership? I wonder if he shares my view that the merger between Vodafone and Three will have real consequences in terms of pricing for customers, but also job losses here in Britain.
That is certainly the risk. And I think mergers more generally need to be looked at closely. It's why we have the Competition and Markets Authority and why these things are indeed considered in the terms I described. More recently, of course, as my right honourable friend from New Forest will know, as a former member of the ISC, which I remain a member of, government introduced other legislation in respect of security and large businesses and mergers and all of similar related matters, because it's important to gauge the national interest in all kinds of ways when one considers business activity. But I'll say no more about that because it will be digressing from my main theme, although I can see an eagerness to intervene. I give way to my neighbour.
I'm most grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way, indeed, and he makes a powerful case about the differences between small businesses, entrepreneurs, franchisees and the big corporates. Does he accept my concern that franchisees suffer the risk of essentially corporate bullying from the mega companies, the likes potentially of Vodafone, and they don't have any form of regulatory umbrella comfort, and that entities like the British Franchise Association may sound effective, but are actually toothless in the face of such corporate bullying?
As ever, because I've worked closely on this subject with the right honourable gentleman, he and I are on the same page. He's absolutely right that franchising can be used as a method to exaggerate the power of the business at the heart of the franchise and to weaken the position of franchisees. And my assertion is that is common and is particular in the case of Vodafone.
Can I just...
I've got two more. I'm going to take the honourable gentleman and then
I'll be brief.
That's why I run in the front.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way and I congratulate him for securing this very important adjournment debate. Like him, I've met Vodafone franchisees both in my constituency, particularly the Chesley Street franchise holder, former franchise holder, who I met again today. I'm grateful to him for setting out the legal advice that he's received about the ongoing case. So I will be careful about what I say, other than to say I think there are major corporates that treat their franchisees very badly, that sign them up on one set of terms, one rate card, and then change the goalposts. And then when people dissent and complain about that, they find their franchises withdrawn and they lose their investment when they have put a great deal into that corporate giant. And I think that this is a matter that in the near future, is going to require some ministerial attention. But I thank the right honourable gentleman very much for bringing this to the House's attention.
Wait for my right honourable friend.
I don't need to detain you very long, but I actually very much supported the union's position on this. I thought this was wrong at the time. And when you look at an organisation like CK, without straying into the issues of the bids, this organisation from China has links now and control over UK power networks, Northumbrian Water, Wales and West Utilities, Evershot Rail. It's intriguing, the network that they have, but hugely around the power networks and the communications networks. All of those are now falling into the hands of conglomerates that have nothing to do with the UK, but government from a different country. And this is the big problem that we face. It's not that you don't like big businesses, but it's just that so often now these big businesses operate from outside of our legal empowerment.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend who takes a great interest in these matters, and it's precisely why I posed the earlier question to the Minister about how closely he and others had looked at that merger. I say no more than that about it, but but it does seem to me to be a legitimate question to ask. Were those things considered in this particular case, and how are they generally considered? For if my right honourable friend is right, that there are threats that result from this, under existing legislation and regulation, it's perfectly possible for government to become involved in these kind of commercial affairs. I will give way once more and then make a little more progress.
Madam Speaker, can I put on record that I omitted the use of right honourable in my earlier intervention, so can I correct that? But also the right honourable gentleman for Chingford made a very important point in terms of bigger businesses operating outside of the UK, perhaps in some cases abusing their position. Can I also, on a lighter note, encourage him to join a trade union? I'd be happy to supply him with a membership form.
Well, I'm again grateful to the honourable gentleman. It seems to me there is a mood across the House tonight that more must be done. And this minister, an experienced member of this House, will have gathered that mood could easily, from this small beginnings, become a crescendo, which might endanger the very safety of his office and the government as a whole. So let's hope this is the beginning of a journey, both for the government and the minister, towards a regime that counters the very things that have been described by members from across the House. Now, I will, because I'm a long-standing friend of the right honourable gentleman, I will certainly give way to him, and then I must make progress.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful to him. The right honourable gentleman is doing the House a favour in his work tonight. I should first declare an interest in that I have a close relative who works for the CMA, and I don't wish to comment on competition and mergers, more to ask him perhaps to work with me to support the government's work. I believe ministers are shortly to do some further work to offer greater support to small businesses, both in terms of opening up government procurement, but other matters as well. And I certainly, in my own constituency, like him, am a very keen supporter of small business, and my own small business competition has provided a great deal of recognition for businesses, whether they're repairing small musical instruments through to local florists, to people providing other services, and indeed many other forms of small business. So I do want to commend the broad thrust of his work tonight, although I don't want to comment on the CMA.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for the honourable gentleman's support. Now, during the pandemic, Madam Speaker, the UK government introduced a business rates relief package, which allowed businesses with commercial leases to claim relief on their business rates. That was designed to help firms with physical stores compensate for lost footfall during lockdowns, and it was an essential lifeline to those smaller businesses. This was automatically applied to businesses through local councils. From the 11th of March 2020 to June 21, the relief was at 100%, with no cash cap, and ratepayers with more than one property were entitled to relief for each eligible property. Franchisees were eligible to receive this relief, and it would have been automatically applied to stores operated by companies like Vodafone and others, and not through the franchise programme. It's worth noting that some corporations that benefit from that scheme, such as Tesco, although I hold no candle for Tesco generally, by the way, have since returned the money to the government. Now, the question is whether Vodafone, how Vodafone used that money. Did it achieve its original purpose? And I'd be interested in the Minister's answer to that question. Or was it redirected in some way that was out of tune with the government's intention and the proper purpose? It's worth noting, as I say, that this wasn't only available to Vodafone, but to all those organisations that had franchises. And I wonder how other organisations handled this matter and how that compares with the circumstances surrounding Vodafone. The important thing to recall, to remember, to consider as we debate these matters, the franchisees are small business owners with families. It was important to them. Business rate relief was therefore of huge significance and made a meaningful difference to people, as was intended by the Right Honourable Member for Richmond Northallerton, who was Chancellor at the time. The government's stated purpose for the COVID-19 business rate relief was to assist small businesses to carry on training at a financially difficult time where profits in bricks and mortar was much reduced. Yet the question is, was that the reality? The fact that the government later introduced caps on the relief indicates that it was intended to help small businesses, those to whom £100,000 makes a great difference, not to subsidise large globalist corporations with hundreds of stores and access to other types of relief. So I wonder what assessment the Minister has made of how this kind of funding was used during the COVID pandemic. Too often, franchisees' payments by those who franchise them are cut drastically and with little or no explanation. Contracts are often terminated with just a few days' notice, with stores repossessed with little notice, often without valid reasons for doing so, leaving debts and loans to be repaid with no income. Franchisees claim that they face fines, clawbacks, grossly disproportionate to errors in question, in some cases errors that led to fines were results of failures in major corporation systems, yet the financial burden is often unfairly placed on franchisees. And communications raising serious concerns, though made, are often unanswered, and pressing issues ignored for long periods of time, leaving franchisees without support or resolution to their problems. Moreover, it's emerged that in the case of Vodafone, whistleblowers have warned of a series of senior Vodafone executives that scores of its franchise store owners face financial ruin. So I'd like to ask the Minister what steps the government is taking to regulate corporate businesses' relationship with their franchisees. We're not speaking, as I said, of powerful businesses with deep legal departments and balance sheets to absorb losses. Ordinary people, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, who saw an opportunity when they became a franchisee to build a meaningful business of their own under the banner of a global household name, to make a difference to their family, but also to their community, to the towns in which they're situated. People with their savings, their homes, and their reputations on the line, because they believe that a franchise agreement with a company like Vodafone, but there are others too, would be safe and secure. As I said, the Competition and Markets Authority last month confirmed the merger of Vodafone and Three. So can the Minister confirm the matter of the problems with franchisees were discussed ahead of that merger being approved? Indeed, more broadly, can such a merger really be said to benefit the British public, given its forecast to cost 1,600 UK jobs? And evidence from overseas shows that countries with fewer mobile phone operators tend to charge higher prices to consumers. Can the Minister confirm what steps the government is taking to investigate allocations of inappropriate use of government relief during the COVID pandemic? Specifically, in relation to businesses and franchisees, will the Minister confirm that all allegations of misappropriation of government relief schemes intended for franchisees should be investigated as part of the inquiry into COVID by the COVID Commissioner? For those franchisees facing financial distress, will the Minister urge banks to show leniency and support? And will he commit to looking afresh at the lack of enforceable regulations governing franchisor conduct? A key lesson, Madam Deputy Speaker, from the Post Office scandal is we must not allow the sophisticated power of a corporate body or the impression created by an impressive balance sheet to persuade us to ignore the voices of less powerful individuals who speak out. Many franchisees have given up stable jobs. Some have taken out personal loans. Some remortgaged their homes. Yet they train staff, open stores, serve customers, and they're told by the big business that they're partners. But when the going gets rough, when the Commission cuts come with little warning, when franchisees' performance plummets due to decisions beyond their control, and when stores are repossessed without adequate notice, they're left out on their own, high and dry. No lifeline, no dialogue, just silence for the corporations they once trusted. I can't believe that this minister doesn't feel as I do about corporate malpractice, about greedy, soulless, heartless firms who act irresponsibly and hide behind the high wall of their substance. Government has a duty not only to promote entrepreneurship and business, but to protect entrepreneurs and ensure businesses do not take an unfair advantage of their staff. We must call time on the era of corporate giants using legal structures not as a framework for partnership, but as a shield for avoidance, for avoiding their responsibility and their decency. Brands that trade on a reputation and public trust must be held accountable for the actions they take, which cause real harm. We must move away from globalist, faceless corporate model, which has enriched a few, and towards a different kind of economic order, where we shorten supply lines, when we encourage small and medium-sized businesses, where we understand that economics must serve a civil purpose. I call it fraternal economics, where community and economic activity are bound together in a common cause. We can build that kind of economic future, but it requires government to know when to step forward, to support business, and to when to step back, not to suffocate entrepreneurship. That is a future that's within our grasp, but it will require this government, perhaps any government, to think afresh about the power balance between large, faceless businesses and those smaller entrepreneurs, those ordinary people, people like most of us, I guess, who simply want to get on and do the best for their family and their community. I know which side I'm on. I'm on the side of those people because I know they make so much difference in my constituency and across the whole of our kingdom. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Minister Gareth Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the usual way, I thank the Right Honourable Member for South Holland and the Deepings for tabling this debate. Having crossed swords with him when our positions were reversed, I approached this debate with a particular degree of wariness, not least because he has assembled a very distinguished and cross-party group of members to participate in this debate. And as well as his own contribution, we heard from the Right Honourable Gentleman for Chingford, we've heard from my Honourable Friend for Stockport, the Honourable Gentleman for Boston, my Honourable Friend for Durham, and my other Honourable Friend here today from Reading as well. Each of them making important points. I do very much agree with, in particular, with some of the opening remarks that the Right Honourable Gentleman made about small and medium-sized businesses being very much the backbone of our communities, important and fundamental to the strength of each one of our constituencies. And we as a government are determined to do much more to support our SMEs going forward. It's why we will publish a strategy to support SMEs shortly, a point I think my Honourable Friend for Reading alluded to. The Honourable Gentleman was absolutely right, Right Honourable Gentleman was absolutely right in saying that we should do more as a country to celebrate our entrepreneurs and to champion their interests. They are brave, they are risk takers, they create wealth, and they make all our communities better and richer. And we are determined as a government to encourage more people to come forward as entrepreneurs, to take the risks to succeed and to grow businesses in our country. It's why we have already taken a number of measures to support SMEs, establishing a business growth service inspired by the US Small Business Administration, the Secretary of State for Business and Trade has already committed to do just that. That's why, too, we saw one of the outcomes of the spending review being a 2/3 increase